Chapter 25-36. No one knew where they came from. They had just walked through the dense forest, and there was nothing hiding there. But at this moment, the swarm of 1,000 silkworms that had appeared all around them made them extremely terrified. When they thought about how these things might have been hiding above or below their feet when they passed through the dense forest, their legs turned to jelly. These 1,000 silkworms were extremely terrifying. They did not attack in such a situation, but waited for them to enter the open space before they started to surround them. His scheming was not inferior to humans at all. Among them, there must be some that have gained sentience. They were king worms. Indeed, just as they thought about it, they saw a huge golden king worm wriggling towards them under the protection of a group of 1,000 silkworms that were much larger than ordinary 1,000 silkworms. Its gaze was fixed on the few disciples of the Tianfeng Chu clan, and its saliva kept flowing out of its mouth. These people were very powerful, and their bodies contained a vast amount of spirit energy. In the eyes of the 1,000 silkworm king, they were the best nourishing food that could help it evolve. It was no wonder that these disciples of the Tianfeng Chu clan grew up in the Tianfeng Chu clan. They were given the best resources in terms of food, clothing, housing, and transportation. Even his flesh and blood had been nurtured and tempered by countless spiritual medicines and spiritual items. In the eyes of the 1,000 silkworm king, they were walking spiritual herbs in human form. It was upset that it let 2 of Chu Yufei escape in the morning, and now 4 more came. The 1,000 silkworm king was overjoyed. If it had not ordered the 1,000 silkworms to stop, Chu Tianming and the rest would not have been able to walk to the center of the open space unscathed. Humans wanted to hunt them, but they did not know that they wanted to hunt them too. The 1,000 silkworm king looked at Chu Tianming and the rest greedily, but it did not look at the rest of the mercenaries. Instead, the other 1,000 silkworms were eyeing them covetously. This was because Chu Tianming and the rest with the best potential were the prey of the king. However, although the rest of them lacked spirit energy and their flesh and blood were not as delicious as Chu Tianming and the rest, they were still meat no matter how small a mosquito's leg was. They didn't mind at all. A group of 1,000 silkworms surged out of the dense forest. The countless spots on their bodies spurted out thousands of threads, reinforcing the net they had already set up in the open space. At that moment, Chu Tianming and the others finally knew what they had just encountered. It turned out to be the threads spat out by these magical beasts. After knowing the reason, they hurriedly used their swords and sabers to cut the threads around them. They wanted to cut off the threads that were entangled in the open space. They wanted to cut a bloody path out. However, as soon as they did so, they realized that they could only barely cut a single thread with their swords. Even if those mercenary group leaders who were at or above the 6th level of the human martial realm, they would only be able to split a dozen of them. Compared to the reinforcing threads that the 1,000 silkworms spat out, it was not even worth mentioning. 1,000 silkworms, 1,000 silkworms. Every time they spat out silk, they could spit out at least 1,000 strands. Chapter 25-37. However, at this moment, the 1,000 silkworms had already formed their webs and were waiting for their prey. Chu Tianming and the rest were like mosquitoes that had fallen into a spider's web. They struggled to break free but were unable to do so. Speaking of which, they were unlucky. Previously, Chu Ku, and the rest were attacked as soon as they entered the open space. In the end, they were lucky enough to escape. The 1,000 silkworm king worm was very depressed. This time, it deliberately let Chu Tianming and the rest enter before attacking. Therefore, Chu Tianming and the rest were like trapped in a spider's web. They could not escape at all. Layers upon layers of silk had sealed off their escape routes from all directions. The 1,000 silkworms also wriggled and spread out under the king worm's command. They surrounded all 4 directions of the open space, ensuring that even if they were lucky enough to escape from the open space, they would not be able to run away. The surroundings of the dense forest were spat into huge cocoons, sealing off all escape routes for Chu Tianming and the rest. Under the attack of the 1,000 silkworms, they were constantly compressed and gathered. In the end, they were all trapped in the open space. When the 1,000 silkworms approached, their fate would be 10,000 times worse than Chu Ku, and the rest. Everyone would be devoured by the 1,000 silkworms and turned into fertilizer in their stomachs to nourish their bodies and spiritual energy. At the thought of this, the group of mercenaries fell into despair. F*CKU. Chu Tianming. We told you that there was danger in here, but you refused to listen to us. Look at you now. All of us will be buried with you. A high-ranking mercenary group leader's eyes were red as he punched Chu Tianming. The arrogant Chu Tianming, who had looked at them with disdain, fell flat on his face. The other disciples of the Heavenly Wind Chu clan were all shocked when they saw this. Before they could react, they were beaten up by the other mercenaries. Stop! Chu Tianming's teeth were about to fall out. As their guards, these mercenaries were naturally stronger than them. Previously, because of the employment agreement, they could not attack them and could only listen to their orders. But at this moment, because they felt that they were dead for sure, they didn't have anything to worry about. Let's beat them up first. Anyway, as long as they didn't die, they didn't have to worry about being punished by the contract. Everyone wanted to kill Chu Tianming and the others. Therefore, Chu Tianming's shout did not receive any response at all. In fact, the way they beat them up became even more ferocious and ruthless. If it weren't for their stubbornness, how could they possibly be trapped in this land of death? He clearly knew that Chu Ku and the others had died in this dense forest. These people actually thought highly of themselves and thought that Chu Ku, and Chu Yufei's mercenaries were useless. This time, all of them were going to die here. The group of people beat up Chu Tianming and the others in despair. The latter and the others were beaten until they cried out in pain, but they couldn't fight back. Above the call, Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up when she saw the king worm. There really was a king worm among the 1,000 silkworms. She was just thinking about how to lure all the 1,000 silkworms out to see if the king worm was there. Chapter 25:38. Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up when she saw the 1,000 silkworms swarming out of the forest. These demonic beasts were all treasures. With them, she would be able to create better meridians for Yi Qianxian. This way, the man would not have to suffer the pain of his meridians breaking when he attacked again. Especially the 1,000 silkworm king. The insect treasure in its body had the ability to regenerate indefinitely. After obtaining it, Yi Qianren would be able to deal with any ordinary attacks. Luo Qingtong was indescribably happy when she thought about how Yi Qianxian would be able to get rid of the situation where his meridians would explode and his blood would flow like a river. However, even if the 1,000 silkworm king's meridians could regenerate indefinitely, there was a time limit. They would not be able to regenerate immediately even if they were broken. Hence, the silk threads in these 1,000 silkworm king's meridians could not be left out. Luo Qingtong looked at these 1,000 silkworms as if she was looking at a huge treasure. Beside her, Gui Feng and the rest walked over. When they saw the scene below, they immediately asked Luo Qingtong, "Little Seven, can we save old Shen and the rest?" They were referring to the mercenaries who followed Chu Tianming and the rest. Among them, there were a few high-level mercenary groups that Gui Feng and the rest knew. It would be fine if they did not meet them. Now that they saw them trapped in the 1,000 silkworms net trap, they could not bear to see them die. The mercenaries in Tianfeng Mercenary City were quite united against outsiders. Their own internal affairs were their own internal affairs. There was competition, but they could not bear to watch the other party die. However, Gui Feng and the rest did not want to make things difficult for Luo Qingtong. Hence, they asked if she could save them and if there was a way. If there was no way, then there was nothing they could do. After all, it would be difficult for them to deal with so many 1,000 silkworms, especially when the other party's net trap was set. If they tried to save the mercenaries by force, they might lose themselves. Thinking of this, Gui Feng and the rest looked at Luo Qingtong. Even Chu Xiaofeng looked at Luo Qingtong. Those were the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family. Although they were from the 6th elder's side and not the 8th elder's side, they were still from the Tianfeng Chu family. It would be best if they could be saved. Of course, he would not force Luo Qingtong. Of course. After all, the 1,000 silkworms were terrifying and dangerous. He wasn't stupid enough to disregard his own life for others. Yes. Luo Qingtong's words. Speaking of which, 6th Elder's people could be considered to have done her a great favor. Without them, Luo Qingtong would have to spend a lot of effort to lure the 1,000 silkworms and 1,000 silkworm king worms out. Now, the 1,000 silkworms king were all lured. Luo Qingtong's blood eyes had already found a way to deal with the 1,000 silkworms when she scanned the dense forest and the bodies of the 1,000 silkworms. Seeing that the people from the Tianfeng Chu family had lured the 1,000 silkworms and 1,000 silkworm king worms out for her, she decided to save them. After all, if it were not for them, Chu Xiaofeng's team would have suffered some casualties. Luo Qingtong hated it when the people around her got into trouble. Luo Qingtong agreed without hesitation. Gui Feng and the rest were instantly overjoyed. Chu Xiaofeng also thanked Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2539. One of them bit his lips. No one knew what he was thinking. Another person gritted his teeth and shouted at Luo Qingtong with a sullen face, "How shameless! These 1,000 silkworms are so powerful. Even the 6th Elder's people can't deal with them. How many people do you have here? How dare you boast that you can save people? You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Chu Xiaofeng, you also let her do whatever she wants. Don't tell me you're gay and like her." Chu Ku's eyes were burning. She saw the intimacy between Yi Qianxian and Luo Qingtong just now. She didn't know why, but there was a burst of anger in her heart. She didn't know what was going on. The man with the white jade mask had been covering his face. She didn't know what he looked like at all, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. The other party seemed to have a natural bearing and temperament that made people unable to take their eyes off him. Chu Ku was sure that the other party was definitely not an ordinary person. Not only that, but he was also good-looking. But at this moment, not only did the other party ignore them, but he was also so close to Luo Xiaoqi. Chu Ku saw it clearly just now. If Yi Qianren hadn't retreated quickly, perhaps their lips would have touched. Bastard, this B*TCH, she caused her to be so miserable, and she even dared to steal the man she liked. She didn't even look at her poor appearance, and she was a man. How could she steal him from her? Chu Ku's sleeves were almost torn by her. Now that he saw Chu Xiaofeng and the rest listening to Luo Qingtong's words, he could not hold it in anymore. Luo Qingtong raised her eyebrows and looked at Chu Ku, who was looking at her with fire in her eyes. Suddenly, she rolled her eyes and pulled Yi Qianxian over. "That's right, I'm gay. So what? You probably don't know how happy I am to have girls in my arms. I'm not like you. As the third miss of the Tianfeng Chu family, no one wants you." Luo Qingtong had already seen that Chu Ku and Chu Yufei had been staring at Yi Qianxian. Really, this stinky man, even with a mask on his face, couldn't stop others from throwing themselves at him. Luo Qingtong was unhappy. If she was unhappy, Chu Ku and the others wouldn't be happy. If not for the fact that there were people from the Heavenly Wind Shu clan guarding outside, Luo Qingtong did not want to cause any trouble and cause Yi Qianren and the others to expose their identities. She would have attacked Chu Ku. Was her man so easy to covet? She would slowly be envious, jealous, and hateful. You're shameless. Chu Ku was so angry that her face turned green and red. How could this Luo Xiaoqi say such shameless words? Chu Ku wasn't afraid that Luo Qingtong would attack her. There were so many people here, and the Tianfeng Chu family's people were guarding outside. Once they knew that she was hurt by a B*TCH like Luo Xiaoqi, they definitely wouldn't let it go. By then, the entire mercenary city would be in trouble. But who would have thought that Luo Qingtong would admit to her words and even pull the white jade masked man over to prove it? And the other party didn't even refute. Could it be that he was really gay? Chu Ku was angry, anxious, and embarrassed. If Chu Yufei hadn't stopped her, she would have pounced on Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2540. This was because Chu Xiaofeng had already blocked in front of Luo Qingtong. Chu Xiaofeng wouldn't care if she was the young lady of the Tianfeng Chu family. He would definitely make a move on her and teach her a lesson. Chu Ku's anger had reached its peak. In the end, her eyes rolled back and she fainted. Tisk, she's so weak. The young ladies of the Tianfeng Chu family are really delicate. Luo Qingtong didn't expect that Chu Ku would faint from anger after she said a few words and didn't even get serious. Her ability to resist attacks was on a completely different level from Luo Xinning and Feng Wan. Luo Qingtong raised her hand and gently rubbed her chin. Chu Ku should be glad that she had met Luo Qingtong and not Luo Qingtong. Otherwise, with her psychological quality, she would have been played to death several times in the true Spill continent. Feng Wan and the others were better. Speaking of which, Feng Wan, that woman, if the crack in the southern region was caused by her and the green smoke in her body, she should be in the outer region right now, right? She didn't know how she was doing now. She hoped that she wasn't doing too badly. Otherwise, she couldn't help but be disappointed. After all, the higher the other party climbed, the more miserable they would be when they fell. Wasn't that right? She had sent troops to 2 dynasties and almost killed her grandfather and grandmother, as well as everyone in the Luo family. Feng Wan, I'm a very vengeful person. I'll remember each and every one of these things for you. When you and I meet again, I will settle everything with you one by one, with interest included. You'd better be able to hold on a little longer. Otherwise, this matter will be meaningless. Right? Luo Qingtong's lips revealed a bloody smile. The coldness in her eyes completely froze people's hearts. Chu Yufei originally wanted to take the opportunity to cry after Chu Ku fainted and blame Luo Qingtong to distract her. But before she could speak, she looked up and met Luo Qingtong's eyes. She instantly shuddered. She didn't know why, but the words at the tip of her tongue couldn't come out. Even the pretentious tears that were about to gush out of her eyes were suddenly frightened back. What kind of eyes were those? It was as if all things were going to die. It was bloody and boundless. One's soul seemed to be frozen just by looking at it. How could this Luo Xiaoqi have such a terrifying eyes? Chu Yufei's body stiffened, and she couldn't say a word. On the other hand, Luo Qingtong quickly reined in her emotions after her murderous aura was revealed. She looked at Chu Yufei with a smile and said, Miss Yufei and Miss Ku are really sisters. Since Miss Ku has fainted, Miss Yufei doesn't have to participate in the battle later. Otherwise, if the 2 of you get hurt, we mercenaries can't afford it. Luo Qingtong originally didn't intend to bring Chu Ku and Chu Yufei down. These 2 people were big trouble. It would be good if they didn't drag her down. She was most afraid that they would be more of a hindrance, but she couldn't kill them. At this moment, Chu Ku's fainting had helped her. Luo Qingtong directly asked Chu Yufei to stay, so that the other party couldn't find a reason to follow her. Didn't she want to be sisters with Chu Ku? Then she should stay here and take care of her. Chapter 2541. Luo Qingtong clearly saw that Chu Yufei wanted to fall on Yi Qianren's body, but the latter walked away, so she did not get what she wanted. She would not give Chu Yufei a chance to follow her and throw herself at Yi Qianxian. After giving these instructions, Luo Qingtong left with Chu Xiaofeng and the others. Looking at her back, Chu Yufei bit her lips hard, and her eyes were full of unwillingness. She and Chu Ku had really underestimated Luo Xiaoqi before. She didn't expect that she was the soul of Mercenary City. A weak young man, in the fierce and ruthless mercenary city where life and death were played, actually made a name for himself. Not only that, but she was also able to make so many mercenaries submit to her willingly. Even Chu Xiaofeng was convinced by him. This was not something an ordinary person could do. Perhaps no one noticed that Luo Qingtong was the leader of Chu Xiaofeng's team at this moment. Even if the young man tried to hide his sharpness, the kingly momentum and convincing demeanor he showed from time to time could always make people listen to him unconsciously. Even Bei Qing and Feng Yu, who were absolutely loyal to Yi Qianxian, followed his orders subconsciously. By the time they reacted, they had already followed Luo Qingtong and the others down nearly 100 meters. "Master," they looked at Yi Qianxian beside them, and their scalps tingled. They didn't know why they inexplicably listened to Luo Qingtong's words. It was really strange. Normally, even in Tiandu might not be able to order them around. Not to mention a young man like Luo Xiaoqi. This young man was really strange. Only Yi Qianxian looked at Luo Qingtong more and more gloomy and deep. "Don't worry, after tonight, we will know the answer. Follow closely." Ignoring the looks of Bei Qing and Feng Yu, Yi Qianxian's face was indifferent, and his thin lips slightly opened. "Don't let a single thousand silkworm go." These silkworms were all the foundation for him to protect Luo Qingtong in the future. He would never allow any mistakes. Yes. Bei Qing and Feng Yu were relieved when they saw that their master didn't seem to blame them. They continued to follow Luo Qingtong and the others down the canal. They knew that Yi Qianxian's "follow closely" referred to Luo Qingtong. This young man was really favored by their master. But when they left, what would master do? Would he take him with him or something else? If he brought her along, how was he going to explain himself if he met the demonic doctor in the future? And what if his master was really gay? Oh my God. I reckon the entire sky is about to collapse. Wind Feather hugged his head full of paste, and as he moved his body, he kept scrolling through the screen in his mind. He always felt that he had spied on a big secret. What should he do? And if his master really found out that Luo Xiaoqi was his true love, what would the evil doctor do? Would she, in a fit of anger, take her sword and kill her way to Tiandu, just to suppress her master, this heartless man? Thinking of such a scene, he had a toothache. Feng Yu was stupefied. No one knew that he was crazily complaining in his heart, and he was very worried about his master. He had always been mature and prudent. If it were Bei Qing, he would have already shouted. While he was thinking, Yi Qianxian's figure flashed and suddenly appeared beside Luo Qingtong. Chapter 25-42. Yi Qianxian raised his hand and waved his sleeves, taking Luo Qingtong into his arms. Luo Qingtong and the others had already entered the dense forest. Because they already knew that all the 1,000 filaments worms had been lured out by the 6th elder's people. Because the dense forest was the territory of the 1,000 filaments worms, there would be no danger in the dense forest at all if they were not here. The group of people suddenly rushed straight in the direction of the open space. Luo Qingtong was taken into Yi Qianxian's arms at this time. She was stunned for a moment, feeling a little incredulous. Didn't this man not like others to get close to him? Even with her identity as Luo Xiaoqi, he could only do it so as not to hurt her. He had never let her get close to him. Not to mention holding her in his arms at this moment. Only Luo Qingtong had done such an action when she was still in her original identity. At this moment, being held in Yi Qianxian's arms, Luo Qingtong exerted great self-control to not subconsciously put her hands around his thin waist. The man's aura was so familiar, and his arms were so safe, hard and soft. The hard part was his muscles, and the soft part was the way he used to treat her like a pearl and a treasure. Luo Qingtong had always been calm and self-controlled, but the moment she entered Yi Qianxian's arms, she had an impulse to hug him back and rely on him. Everything about this man had been engraved in her heart. Luo Qingtong had no doubt that if she had bumped into Yi Qianxian's arms when he came to check her identity in the middle of the night, she would have definitely recognized him. Even if he had covered his face and changed all the decorations and aura she was familiar with. Luo Qingtong's hand quietly stroked Yi Qianxian's left ring finger. It used to be the matching ring of the 9 Phoenix ring and the Shifang dragon ring. But this time, it was empty. Her previous guess was right. Yi Qianxian had indeed encountered something, so the Shifang dragon ring was taken off. And her 9 Phoenix ring had lost its effect because of this and could be taken off. But she didn't expect that he was hiding his identity. However, no matter how familiar and warm this embrace was, Luo Qingtong couldn't indulge in it. She couldn't let Yi Qianxian see her identity now. At least, she couldn't before leaving this abandoned continent. Brother, it's okay. Please put me down. Luo Qingtong struggled to escape from Yi Qianxian's arms. However, Yi Qianren's eyes were cold as she stared at her. Seeing her movements, he immediately raised Luo Qingtong's arms. Very much. Those 1,000 silkworms are very strong. You'd better stay by my side obediently. Yi Qianren's voice was cold. Taking someone's money, isn't it? Hearing Yi Qianxian's words, Luo Qingtong thought about it and agreed. No wonder this man took the initiative to approach her. It turned out that the money attack, the spiritual grass attack of these days had taken effect. Sure enough, one could do whatever one wanted with money. It was the same for spiritual grass. Luo Qingtong thought about it and immediately felt relieved. She was wondering why this man's actions were so strange. So it was like this. Fortunately, she had been stuffing him with spiritual herbs for the past few days and it was indeed effective. Chapter 25:43. Luo Qingtong was afraid that Yi Qianxian would approach her inexplicably. This man's intuition was very sensitive. He had doubted her identity several times, causing her to not dare to approach him. Now that she knew that he was fulfilling his duty as a protector for the sake of the spiritual herbs, she immediately felt relieved. She finally had a reason to approach him openly. She was happy. Luo Qingtong's eyes were smiling. Yi Qianren looked at her crescent-shaped eyes. Her gaze swept past her and the light in her eyes became even more deep and serene. He did not say anything. He just raised his hand to protect Luo Qingtong. He was not lying when he said that he would protect Luo Qingtong. These 1,000 silkworms had average strength, but they were extremely difficult to deal with. In particular, Luo Qingtong and the others needed their silk threads, so they had to keep their corpses intact as much as possible. In this way, Yi Qianxian and the others could not use many of their strength and skills. Otherwise, they could easily damage their bodies. Because they were too strong. Yi Qianxian, in particular, was not prepared to take action. He was only prepared to protect Luo Qingtong. The latter had no intention of participating in the battle at all. With her current strength, if she participated in the battle, she would not be a match for these 1,000 silkworms unless she used her blood eye and life and death sword. She had better not join in the fun. She would continue to be a weak young man. Moreover, she really missed Yi Qianxian's embrace. Based on this man's arrogant and cold temperament, after today, he would definitely not act like this again. Luo Qingtong felt that she really could not miss out on this opportunity. She had better enjoy it. With this thought in mind, Luo Qingtong immediately leaned in Yi Qianxian's arms and let him lead her to the open space. Swoosh! Luo Qingtong and the others approached the open space silently. At the same time, the 1,000 silkworms also rushed over to Chu Tianming and the others while drooling. The latter and the others were completely trapped in the center of the open space. With the reinforcement of the 1,000 silkworms, traces of the invisible net in the open space were all revealed. It was a sea of threads. Other than the small area where they were standing, there was no other place for them to step on at a glance. The 1,000 silkworms wriggled quickly and approached Chu Tianming and the others. Everyone's faces turned pale when they saw the huge mouth and pincers. There were even some people who burst into tears. The mercenaries weren't afraid of death, but if they were swallowed like this and turned into fertilizer for the 1,000 silkworms, or even excreted as feces, they found it hard to accept. There wasn't even a decent way to die. Could it be that they were going to die here today? Everyone felt despair in their hearts. At this time, Luo Qingtong and the others had already closed in on the open space. If they rushed out again, they would reveal themselves in the dense forest. Little 7. Chu Xiaofeng and the others looked at Luo Qingtong, not knowing how she was going to deal with these 1,000 silkworms. Especially their threads, they were too difficult to deal with. Not to mention that they had already gathered into a net. If Chu Xiaofeng and the others were careless, not to mention saving Chu Tianming and the others, they might even lose their lives. Everyone looked at Luo Qingtong. Chapter 25-44. Do you see those things? Luo Qingtong raised her hand and pointed to the place where the 1,000 silkworms had just been. There was something shiny there. It looked like the mucus that flowed down from the 1,000 silkworms. Rub all of those things on your weapons, Luo Qingtong said. Then she raised her hand and pointed to several big trees not far away. Peel off the bark of those big trees and take out the white mucus inside. When you move, pour it on those 1,000 silkworms. Okay. Everyone heard her order and immediately responded in unison. Even Chu Xiaofeng couldn't help but agree with the group of mercenaries. By the time he realized that he was not Luo Qingtong's subordinate, the words had already left his mouth. He touched his nose and didn't particularly resist. He just felt a little strange. Luo Xiaoqi seemed to have an aura that made it easy for people to obey her orders. He had never seen this kind of aura even on the patriarch. Was the other party really just a weak youth? He glanced at Luo Qingtong. He saw her snuggling comfortably in Yi Qianren's arms, as if she was on a leisurely trip. Her eyes were slightly narrowed and in an instant, the corner of his lips twitched violently. He suppressed the questions that surged out from the bottom of his heart. Looking at the other party's appearance, he should be a weak youth. What kind of strong person would be hugged by another person like her and enjoy the other party's protection? Luo Qingtong didn't know Chu Xiaofeng's thoughts at all. Of course, even if she knew, she wouldn't care. What's wrong with her relying on her man? Did she eat your rice? She was willing. Luo Qingtong had always done things her own way. No one could force her to do things she didn't want to do. But if she wanted to do something, no one could stop her. As for the rumors that might spread about her short-sleeved clothes, Luo Qingtong indicated that when she and Yi Qianren were at Truce Spill Continent, it wasn't as if they hadn't talked about it before. There was no pressure at all to be involved in a scandal with her man, okay? Therefore, she couldn't be bothered to care about the opinions of Chu Xiaofeng and the others. Of course, other than Chu Xiaofeng, the others quickly rushed toward those two places after answering. Some of them were responsible for collecting the mucus left on the ground by the worms. The other group of people were quietly scraping tree bark and collecting resin. They didn't notice Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian at all. As for the latter, after Luo Qingtong snuggled into his embrace, his expression became increasingly tense. The light in his eyes became increasingly dark and indescribable. His hands, which were hidden under his sleeves, loosened and tightened. In the end, he didn't do anything. While Luo Qingtong and the others were preparing, the situation in the open space was getting more and more tense. The 1,000 silkworms had already broken through to the mercenaries who had been compressed to the center of the open space. The latter and the others could no longer care about beating up Chu Tianming and the others. They could only watch as the behemoths got closer and closer. Their hearts were filled with despair and bitterness. Motherf ***, if anyone can save us today, I'll do anything for them. The leader of a high-ranking mercenary group said with grief and indignation. However, when everyone heard his words, they only smiled bitterly. How could anyone come to save them in such a place? Even if someone knew that they were here, it was impossible to save them from the encirclement of the 1,000 silkworms. Not to mention that it was basically impossible for anyone to know that they were surrounded here. Chapter 25-45. Just as everyone was waiting for death in despair, a voice suddenly rang out. Suddenly, a burst of hearty laughter came from not far in front of them. Haha. Old Chen, you said it yourself. You'll work like a horse for us in the future. Guifeng's expression instantly turned serious when he heard the hearty laughter. Then, he shouted coldly, do it. Boom. Following Guifeng's shout, the mercenaries who were trapped in the open space suddenly discovered that in front of them, there was an explosion of dazzling blade light and sword chi light. At the same time, the clanging of countless weapons sounded in the air. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. The mercenaries were shocked to find that the silk threads that they could not cut no matter how hard they tried were actually cut by Guifeng and the rest's weapons. Ha ha ha. Good, Guifeng, I didn't expect you to make it here. Don't say that I, old Shen, will work like a horse for you. I'll even be a pig for you. The mercenaries were pleasantly surprised when they saw this scene. Especially the senior mercenary leader called Old Shen by Guifeng, who was laughing heartily at this moment. They did not expect to be saved. Guifeng and the rest came at the right time. The mercenaries who followed Chu Tianming and the rest were extremely excited. They immediately brandished their weapons and slashed at the silk threads. However, what shocked them was that Guifeng and the rest cut the silk threads like they were tofu. Why were they so stiff and unable to cut them? Everyone was at a complete loss. They originally thought that these silk threads had a time limit and that after a period of solidification, they would be cut by Guifeng and the rest. Now, it seemed that this was not the case. Everyone was astonished. Guifeng and the rest laughed heartily and threw the mucus of the 1,000 silkworms that they had collected over to them. Use this. Guifeng looked at the ferocious 1,000 silkworms that were charging at them. He waved his hand and said, "Splash." This was Luo Qingtong's order. After cutting the threads, he immediately splashed the 1,000 filarial worms with the resin. Guifeng and the others didn't know what the resin was for. However, they would definitely listen to Luo Qingtong. Because Luo Qingtong had told them to wipe the mucus on their weapons to tell them that she was right. If it weren't for the mucus, they wouldn't have been able to cut those threads so easily. One had to know that they had seen Chu Tianming and the others fight against the 1,000 silkworms' threads. Naturally, he knew how tough and difficult it was to deal with these threads. Bang, bang, bang. Buckets after buckets of resin were splashed onto the 1,000 silkworms. The latter was waving its huge pincers ferociously as it madly closed in on them. Suddenly, it stopped and became flustered. Roar! The king worm was surrounded by a group of 1,000 silkworms. When it smelled the scent of the resin, it immediately became anxious. It let out a sharp cry, then turned around and rushed towards the direction of the dense forest. Behind it, the group of 1,000 silkworms also scattered and fled. However, it was too late. The resin had all landed on them. They were drenched, and none of them were spared. Chapter 2546. The situation on the field changed dramatically. The 1,000 silkworms that had been splashed with resin were firmly stuck to the silk threads that they had densely covered in the open space. The silk threads that were originally unaffected by them seemed to have lost their connection to them and stuck to them, preventing them from leaving. They couldn't break free no matter how hard they tried. It turned out that the resin blocked the mucus and aura on their bodies so that they were no longer unaffected by the silk threads. Now, they were no different from Guifeng and the others. They were also obstructed and entangled by the silk threads. However, Guifeng and the others had weapons that could cut these silk threads. It wasn't as convenient for them to clean up the silk threads as it was for Guifeng and the others. How would these 1,000 silkworms feel now that they had become their prey? The 1,000 silkworms that had been baring their fangs and brandishing their claws at Guifeng and the others, desperately spitting out threads in an attempt to bind them, were in an even more miserable state. After being splashed with resin, they became even more miserable. In an instant, the silk threads that had been spitting at Guifeng and the others all wrapped around them, turning them into large cocoons. They couldn't move at all. The group of 1,000 silkworms, who had been aggressive just a moment ago, had all become fish in the net. This was something no one had expected. After splashing the resin, Guifeng and the others were ready to fight to prevent these 1,000 silkworms from going berserk. However, no one had expected that the resin that Luo Qingtong asked them to collect would make the 1,000 silkworms lose their immunity to the silk threads. Instead, they were wrapped up in the silk threads. Even Bei Qing and Feng Yu, who were ready to stop the 1,000 silkworms from escaping, widened their eyes in an instant. Damn, this Luo Xiaoqi was really something. They didn't expect that the resin she asked them to collect would have such an effect. This made it very convenient for them to kill these 1,000 silkworms. Especially the king worm. They didn't have to worry about exposing their strength too much. Bei Qing and Feng Yu were pleasantly surprised. They looked at the struggling insect king wrapped in the silk thread. They raised their hands and made a gesture. In an instant, a group of people gathered around them and attacked the insect king. The poor king beetle was still desperately using its pincers to cut off the silk threads on its body. But because the resin on its body was too sticky, it couldn't be moved at all. Even if one of the threads was broken, the remaining threads were still hanging on its body, hindering its movements. Especially with the presence of the resin, it couldn't spit out silk threads to weave a net to deal with Bei Qing, Feng Yu, and the others. It could only let them beat it up. One had to know that the 1,000 silkworms' greatest weapon and reliance were their threads. At this moment, this terrifying killing machine was completely destroyed by Luo Qingtong's people's splashing of the resin. Not only that, but it also became a sharp weapon against them, preventing them from escaping immediately. Under the circumstances, the 100,000 silkworms were like tigers that had their teeth pulled out. They were completely trapped in the open space. Gui Feng and the others could easily split them up and then use their strength to slowly grind them to death. In this way, their lives were greatly guaranteed. Chapter 2547. Seeing this scene, Chu Tianming's mercenary guards, who had been forced into a desperate situation by the 1,000 silkworms, were all dumbfounded. They had just smeared the mucus that Gui Feng and the others had thrown at them on their weapons and were about to start a massacre to help Gui Feng and the others. But before they could do anything, they realized that the battle was almost over. The 1,000 silkworms were all rooted to the spot. Under such circumstances, was there any suspense to the battle? Oh my God, if they hadn't seen with their own eyes how ferocious these magical beasts were, they would have been torn apart and eaten. Everyone would have thought that these 1,000 silkworms were not that scary at all. What the F***ck? How did Gui Feng and the others do it? Smack. Old Chen fiercely slapped his thigh. This is all thanks to little 7th young master. Damn it, I don't know what kind of luck Gui Feng and the others have to meet someone like little 7th young master. Look at them, they didn't suffer much in this abandoned continent. Everyone looked gloomily at Gui Feng and the others, only to see that they were full of energy and their movements were extremely skillful and well coordinated. Even Chu Xiaofeng was working closely with them. His grandmother was a runner. Why hadn't they met someone like little 7th young master? If they could go back in time, when little 7th young master was bullied by the Black Iron Mercenary Corps, they would have stood up for her regardless of their own safety. She was a god of fortune, a life-saving Buddha. The group quickly joined Gui Feng and the others in the battle. Because of their participation, the screams of the 1,000 silkworms under attack became even more mournful. Just then, Yi Qianxian's voice suddenly rang in Luo Qingtong's ears. How do you know that the resin can make these threads wrap around their bodies? Yi Qianxian looked at Luo Qingtong with an unusually deep gaze. He didn't ask about the mucus. After all, it was obvious. Those 1,000 silkworms must have something on them that could ignore these threads. Otherwise, even they would be entangled by these threads. Therefore, Luo Qingtong had Gui Feng and the others smear the mucus on their weapons to attack, which was naturally twice the result with half the effort. But how did she know about the resin? Yi Qianxian's expression was dark, but Luo Qingtong had already thought of an excuse. Do you see any special features on these trees? She raised her hand and pointed at the trees she had pointed out earlier. There are no traces of the 1,000 silkworms on their trees. In addition, although the tenacity of these threads is top-notch, these trees may not be able to withstand the brute force of these mercenaries if they set up a trap here. Under the tug, the tree will break and the threads will become soft. Then, it won't be able to weave a net. As for those threads, they are wrapped around the tree trunks. Sure enough, as Luo Qingtong pointed, Yi Qianxian could easily see that the silk threads spat out by the 1,000 silkworms were all wrapped around the trees and went deep into the trunks. round after round of strangling. So, I guess that these 1,000 silkworms are afraid of these trees, but there is something on them that can strengthen their ability to bind the threads. What's more, these things can even make these threads wrap around their bodies. Luo Qingtong's explanation was reasonable, but Yi Qianxian's gaze deepened. Because Luo Qingtong's words could only explain the abnormality of these trees. But the resin inside was useful, and not something else. How did she know? Yi Qianxian's gaze deeply looked into Luo Qingtong's eyes. Chapter 25:48. Bang! The sound of an attack suddenly came from the depths of the open space. All the mercenaries who were attacking the 1,000 silkworms in the open space were stunned. What was going on? They were all attacking the 1,000 silkworms in the open space. Who was the one who launched the attack in the depths of the open space? To enter the depths of the open space, one had to pass through the open space. The spiritual herbs that the 1,000 silkworms were guarding were inside. Everyone looked at each other. At this moment, the voice of a mercenary beside Old Chen suddenly sounded. It's Chu Tianming and the rest. Damn it. These ungrateful bastards sneaked into the depths of the open space while we were attacking the 1,000 silkworms to steal the spiritual herbs. The mercenary's voice was filled with righteous indignation and a deep sense of shame. Chu Tianming and the rest were the people they had chosen to follow. At this moment, these people first led them into the 1,000 silkworms trap. Now, they sneaked into the depths of the open space while they were attacking the 1,000 silkworms to steal the spiritual herbs from Guifeng and the rest. How despicable. How shameless. After everyone heard his voice, they lifted their heads and looked around. They immediately realized that Chu Tianming and the others were indeed nowhere to be seen. Because Chu Tianming and the rest were beaten black and blue by Old Shen and the rest and were lying on the ground, no one noticed when they disappeared and when they entered the depths of the open space. These bastards. Old Shen and the rest were furious. Chu Tianming and the rest were a disgrace to them. Chu Xiaofeng's face was also ashen. To think that he had asked the young man to save them in front of Luo Xiaoqi. In the blink of an eye, Chu Tianming and the rest had done such a shameless thing. If he had known, he would have let them die at the hands of the 1,000 silkworms. Damn it. Everyone was infuriated, but they couldn't leave. Perhaps they had sensed the battle fluctuations coming from the depths of the open space. The 1,000 silkworms suddenly went berserk and prevented Guifeng and the rest from leaving. At this moment, Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian also sensed the attack in the depths of the open space. Cough, brother, shall we go and take a look? For some reason, Luo Qingtong felt goosebumps when Yi Qianxian looked at her. She felt that the man's gaze was full of meaning. However, no matter how hard she thought about it, she couldn't find any flaws in her body. It was also strange. This man had been acting weird since just now. She didn't know what was going on. Luo Qingtong thought so and inexplicably felt that something was wrong. This sense of foreboding originated from her extremely sharp intuition. But at this moment, before she could carefully sort out what was wrong with Yi Qianxian, she heard a commotion in the depths of the clearing. In an instant, Luo Qingtong's eyes swept over and discovered that it was Chu Tianming and the others. Eyeing her spoils of war. She had promised those spiritual herbs to Chu Xiaofeng and the others. Seeing that Chu Xiaofeng and the others were entangled by the 1,000 silkworms and were unable to leave, Luo Qingtong immediately said to the man beside her. The latter didn't say anything. With a wave of his sleeve, he brought her to the depths of the empty space. At this moment, in the depths of the open space. Chapter 25:49. In front of them, circles after circles of almost solidified threads that looked like real threads wrapped around a lush field. That piece of land was cordoned off. The field was filled with lush green spiritual herbs, and there were at least 1,000 of them. That many spiritual herbs were enough to drive anyone crazy. Chu Tianming and the rest were indeed crazy. They had learned from Guifeng and the others how to smear their weapons with mucus. At this moment, they were attacking the silk threads with all their might, hoping to cut them all before Guifeng and the others arrived. Then, they would pluck all the spiritual herbs. As for Guifeng and the others, who cared if they lived or died? Chu Tianming and the rest sneered in their hearts. In their opinion, Chu Xiaofeng and the others were stupid to come and save them. Since that was the case, they would gladly accept these spiritual herbs. The group was frantically hacking at the silk threads. At this moment, Luo Qingtong's voice sounded leisurely. Are the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family so shameless? Or should I say, are the disciples of the sixth elder of the Tianfeng Chu family so shameless? Tisk tsk. Luo Qingtong's voice was filled with sarcasm. Guifeng and the others were fighting desperately in the open space, and these disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family actually came here to steal these spiritual herbs at this time. Saying that they were shameless was a compliment. They were worse than beasts and ungrateful. Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian appeared in front of Chu Tianming and the rest. Hearing her voice, Chu Tianming and the rest were instantly stunned. They looked up at her, their faces full of shame and anger. Who do you think you are to lecture us? Chu Tianming and the rest did not feel that they had done anything wrong. So what if they stole the spiritual herbs? These spiritual herbs should have been theirs. These mercenaries were all dogs hired by the Tianfeng Chu family to protect them. Since they were dogs, they should have the awareness of a dog. Moreover, if it wasn't for them, these mercenaries wouldn't even have the qualifications to enter the abandoned continent, yet they actually dared to teach them a lesson. Chu Tianming and the others were furious, but Luo Qingtong couldn't help but laugh when she saw their expressions. I've seen many shameless people. This is really the first time I've seen people like you who take shamelessness as a matter of course and a code of conduct. Shameless is not enough to describe your shamelessness. I think the word despicable is better. Luo Qingtong looked at Chu Tianming and the others indifferently. These people should be glad that they were still on the abandoned continent and were not prepared to expose their identities. Otherwise, based on their shameless words, Luo Qingtong had hundreds of thousands of ways to make them die without a burial place. She hated people who treated shamelessness as reason the most. Because in her previous life as a fugitive, those who chased after her also felt that her ability should be used by them. If he couldn't, then he would die. But why should her fate be controlled by someone else? She would kill anyone who dared to have any ideas about her. The light in Luo Qingtong's eyes turned red for a moment, but it quickly returned to normal. She looked at the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu family who were about to break through the silk threads and said indifferently, "If you leave now, we can spare your lives." Chapter 2550. Luo Qingtong smiled sweetly as she looked at Yi Qianxian, who was above her. The latter wore a white jade mask on his face, and his expression was non-committal. He only used a pair of dark and cold eyes to stare coldly at Chu Tianming and the others. When Chu Tianming and the others heard Luo Qingtong's words, they were indescribably furious. They immediately shouted, "Bah! Why don't you take a look at yourselves? How dare you say that you want to kill us? You're simply boasting shamelessly." Chu Tianming and the others did not think that Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian were very powerful experts. Needless to say, the young man was leaning in Yi Qianxian's arms at this moment. One look and they could tell that he was very weak. If she was strong enough, she would not need others to protect her. Moreover, her strength was not even at the venerable realm. Chu Tianming and the others could see through it at a glance. As for Yi Qianxian, how strong could a person who was sent to protect this young man be? If he was really strong, he would have gone with Guifeng and the others to kill those 1,000 silkworms. Why would he need to take on the task of looking after this weak and pitiful young man? These two people dared to say that they wanted to kill them? What a joke! Chu Tianming and the others did not take Luo Qingtong's words seriously. They looked at Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian. After exchanging glances with each other, they suddenly attacked. With a boom, their attacks converged and majestically blasted towards Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian. The strength of Chu Tianming and the others could be considered top-notch among the disciples of the Tianfeng Chu clan. At this moment, the group attacked at the same time, and they used the unique secret technique of the Tianfeng Chu clan to link their attacks together. With a boom, the attack blasted out and was greatly amplified. Its strength was completely comparable to that of an ordinary expert in the human martial arts realm. This was the difference between the disciples of the top families in the Tianfeng domain and the ordinary cultivators. Their strength could be amplified by the various secret techniques of their families. In addition to the various martial skills and equipment provided by their families, the strength they could display was far above that of ordinary powerhouses of the same level. To them, crossing realms to fight enemies was a common occurrence. The true genius disciples of the top aristocratic families, such as Chu Lingfeng and the others, were even stronger than them. This was the foundation of an aristocratic family. This was the importance of resources. At this moment, their attacks were ferociously directed towards Luo Qingtong and Yi Qianxian. They intended to quickly pluck the spiritual grasses and leave after dealing with the two of them. Seeing these attacks, Yi Qianxian's eyes turned cold. He didn't even move. In an instant, with a boom, an extremely powerful and terrifying power suddenly erupted from his body. This power was like a hurricane, like a stormy sea, like a wave rising from the ground. With an overwhelming advantage, it blasted the attacks of Chu Tianming and the others into smithereens. Not only that, but Chu Tianming and the others were also blasted back by the shockwaves from the collision of the terrifying attacks. They spat out blood and all of them were smashed onto the spiritual grasses. Yi Qianxian's attack actually allowed them to break through the interception of the silk threads and crash directly into the spiritual grasses. Puff! Chapter 25:51. This person's strength was actually so strong. If not for the mucus provided by Luo Qingtong, they would not have been able to do anything to these threads. At this moment, Yi Qianren's attack had not only sent them flying, it had also broken all of the threads. If it weren't for the obstruction of these threads, wouldn't all of them have died? Damn it, there was such a strong person among these mercenaries. Chu Tianming and the rest were shocked. At this moment, Guifeng and the rest rushed over after killing the 1,000 silkworms. Chu Tianming, you people are really shameless. Chu Xiaofeng, Guifeng, and the rest rushed over. When they saw Chu Tianming and the rest in the spiritual herb field, they were instantly enraged. These bastards actually took advantage of the time when they were fighting the 1,000 silkworms to secretly come over and pick the spiritual herbs. They were really shameless. Chu Xiaofeng was furious. When Chu Tianming and the rest saw them appear, they did not know why, but they felt relieved. They looked at Yi Qianxian fearfully, then straightened their necks and looked at Chu Xiaofeng and the rest. We should have a share of these spiritual herbs. Chu Xiaofeng, although you saved us, don't forget that without us, how would you deal with those 1,000 silkworms? And these mercenaries beside us, didn't they also help you a lot? Chu Tianming and the rest said shamelessly. They took all the credit for Old Chen and the others' achievements. That was because Old Chen and the rest were their guards. If they helped Chu Xiaofeng and the rest, it was equivalent to them helping Chu Xiaofeng and the rest. Their words instantly disgusted Old Chen and the rest. Chu Tianming and the rest brought them here and almost caused them to die here. Now that they had helped Guifeng and the others, it had instead become their contribution. What the F***ck? They had seen shameless people before, but they had never seen such shameless people. Chu Tianming and the rest did not care so much. They had already offended everyone here. Since that was the case, they might as well reap some benefits. Old Chen and the rest were their guards. There was no doubt about that. Since they had put in the effort, as the employer, they naturally had to get a share. Chu Xiaofeng and the rest did not expect Chu Tianming and the rest to be so shameless. Especially Chu Xiaofeng. He raised his hand and pointed at Chu Tianming and the rest. His mouth opened and closed, and the veins on his forehead popped. He did not know what to say. He felt that he had lost all his face as a descendant of the Tianfeng Chu family. Old Chen and the rest were even worse. They really wanted to rush over, to give them a vicious kick and then shout angrily, "I quit." However, they were already the guards of Chu Tianming and the others. Unless Chu Tianming and the others spoke, they could only follow them. Thinking up to this point, the group of people felt terrible. The feeling of disgust in his heart was as if he had swallowed a fly alive. Right at this moment, Chu Ku, and Chu Yufei also rushed over after seeing that the battle had ended. Brother Chu, seeing Chu Tianming and the rest, the depressed and resentful expression on Chu Ku's face was instantly swept away. She looked at Chu Tianming and the rest in surprise. After seeing that they were all injured, she did not think much of it. Chapter 25-52. The 6th Elder's faction and the 8th Elder's faction were not very close. However, Chu Tianming and Chu Ku's elder brother, Chu Yunfei, were close. If she had known that it was Chu Tianming and the others, she would not have tolerated that *tch Luo Xiaoqi. Chu gritted her teeth as she looked at Luo Qingtong, who was still in Yi Qianxin's arms. Her eyes were filled with indescribable hatred and resentment. She had just arrived late and did not hear anything else. She only heard Chu Tianming's shameless words. Hearing this, she immediately agreed, "Brother Tianming is right. Chu Xiaofeng, everyone worked together to deal with the 1,000 silkworms. Could it be that the 8th Elder and his people want to take all these spiritual herbs for themselves?" As she spoke, her eyes swept across the lush spiritual herb field. There was an indescribable surprise and greed on her face. There were so many spiritual herbs. Humph, she must not let Luo Qingtong and the others get these spiritual herbs. Chu Xiaofeng was such a spineless person. He was a disciple of the Tianfeng Chu family. How could he listen to a mercenary? He was a disgrace to the Tianfeng Chu family. As Chu Ku thought of this, she immediately raised her head and said, "Chu Xiaofeng, don't forget that we were the first to discover these 1,000 silkworms. If we didn't tell you where the 1,000 silkworms were, you wouldn't have gotten these spiritual herbs. We have to get half of these spiritual herbs. You can share the remaining half with Brother Tianming and the others." In this way, she, Chu Tianming, and the others would take 3/4 of the spiritual herbs. How much was left for Chu Xiaofeng and the others? Chu Xiaofeng and the others originally thought that Chu Tianming and the others were shameless enough. They did not expect Chu Ku to be even more shameless than them. The place where they found the 1,000 silkworms? They told them where the 1,000 silkworms were, so they could get these spiritual herbs. Weren't they the ones who were killed by the 1,000 silkworms and then cried and begged them to take them in? In order to let him and the others take them in, and Luo Qingtong needed these 1,000 silkworms, was that why she told them the location of these 1,000 silkworms? Not to mention that these spiritual herbs were not picked up from the ground. They were obtained from the battle between Guifeng and the 1,000 silkworms. If it weren't for Luo Qingtong's solution, they wouldn't know how many casualties they would have suffered. Now that Chu Ku's lips had touched, it became her credit. Chu Xiaofeng and the others felt like cursing, but they didn't know if they should say it. While Chu Xiaofeng and the others were angered to the point of being speechless, Luo Qingtong raised her eyebrows and looked at Chu Yufei. "Miss Yufei, do you also think that Miss Ku is right?" After Chu Yufei appeared, she didn't say anything. She let Chu Ku take the lead. However, since Luo Qingtong knew her nature, of course, she would not let her be so peaceful as to be a peerless white lotus. She had to force her to express her attitude. Moreover, for Chu Ku to be able to say such words, she might have a hand in it. Luo Qingtong was waiting for Chu Yufei to speak. Today, she would solve all these problems together. It would save these people from circling around her man. Her current status was not suitable to deal with wild bees and butterflies. Moreover, she didn't like to waste time with these green tea bitches. Chapter 25-53. In any case, unless Chu Xiaofeng was prepared to go against her mother, 3rd Elder, and 6th Elder, they could only compromise. At that time, they would be able to get a bunch of spiritual herbs without any effort. So what if Luo Xiaoqi and the others tried their best? They would only be able to pave the way for them. Therefore, Chu Yufei was very calm throughout. But she did not expect that Luo Qingtong would target her as soon as she opened her mouth. What was she going to say now? Could it be that she actually agreed with Chu Ku's opinion? But everyone knew how shameless Chu Ku's words were. As soon as she opened her mouth, the beautiful image that she had painstakingly built up in the past was instantly destroyed. At that time, everyone would know what kind of person she was. Thinking of this, Chu Yufei gritted her teeth in her heart. Why was this Luo Xiaoqi so difficult to deal with? She hated Luo Qingtong thoroughly in her heart, but she did not show it on her face. She only bit her lips slightly and lowered her head with a conflicted and embarrassed expression. Sister Ku's words are indeed a little unreasonable. Chu Ku's face was filled with disbelief when she heard Chu Yufei's words. She looked at Chu Yufei, not knowing why she would say that. Wasn't she the one who taught her to say these words? Now she was saying that her words were unreasonable. Chu Ku instantly felt betrayed. No matter how stupid she was, the way she looked at Chu Yufei was somewhat different. And Chu Yufei had no choice. She gritted her teeth and continued weakly, however, although Ku and I can't get the spiritual herbs, Brother Tianming and the others should get it. After all, Brother Xiaofeng, we watched them enter the encirclement of those 1,000 silkworms, didn't we? Chu Tianming and the others jumped up immediately when Chu Yufei said that. Great! Chu Xiaofeng, you actually used us as bait to lure those 1,000 silkworms to attack. 70%. We must get 70%. Ku, Yufei, don't be afraid. You can't miss out on your share. Chu Xiaofeng and the others actually watched us die. If you didn't say it, we wouldn't know. Chu Xiaofeng and the others must settle this matter today. Otherwise, we won't be finished. Chu Tianming and the others looked aggressive. Chu Yufei felt comfortable in her heart, but on the surface, she panicked and said, Brother Tianming, don't be like this. Brother Xiaofeng and the others didn't do it on purpose. Brother Xiaofeng. She turned around and advised Chu Xiaofeng, why don't you do as Brother Tianming and the others say? After all, we were indeed in the wrong in this matter. Ku and I don't want our share. As she said this, her face was full of sincerity. This gentleness and understanding of others, how moving ah! Luo Qingtong was watching from the side. She wanted to cheer for Chu Yufei's performance. What a gentle and kind white lotus. With that thought in mind, Luo Qingtong smiled and said, that's right. Miss Yufei is right. Perhaps young Master Tianming and the others were in a hurry to die in the ambush of the 1,000 silkworms. We controlled them with our thoughts and made them go, right? What do you think? Luo Qingtong's words instantly silenced Chu Tianming and the others. They looked at Luo Qingtong and their faces turned pale. They didn't know what to say. Luo Qingtong's words were too hurtful. With one sentence, she tore apart their and Chu Yufei's pretense. Chu Yufei's face turned red. She was about to say something to salvage the situation but was interrupted by Luo Qingtong. Chapter 2554. Miss Yufei, you don't have to explain. Luo Qingtong looked at Chu Yufei, who had an ugly and stiff expression, and said with a smile, I know that you and Miss Ku have a close sisterly relationship. How can you disagree with her opinion? What you said just now was just to save face for our young Master Feng. You don't want to make things so ugly for everyone, right? Luo Qingtong's words made Chu Yufei's expression extremely stiff and ugly. Luo Qingtong's words completely wasted all her previous efforts. The reason why Chu Yufei said that Chu Ku's words were wrong was that she did not want everyone to think that she was as shameless as Chu Ku, and ruin her image in front of everyone. She carefully maintained her image. Who would have thought that Luo Qingtong's mouth was so sharp? She easily laid out all her intentions in front of her. Not only that, but she also tore apart her mask. Chu Yufei could not refute Luo Qingtong's words. What was there to refute? She and Chu Ku were not close sisters. Didn't that mean that she was hypocritical and that her defense of Chu Ku was all fake? But if she admitted that she and Chu Ku were close sisters, then how could she oppose Chu Ku's opinion? This was not something that good sisters would do. At the end of the day, she was still hypocritical. Not only that, she clearly agreed with Chu Ku's opinion, but she deliberately said that her words were unreasonable. Not only was she hypocritical, but she was also very scheming. Chu Yufei gritted her teeth. For the first time, she was forced to such an extent by someone, and she could not even fight back. Because no matter what she said, Luo Qingtong had something to say to her. He was just a young man. He actually guessed her words and thoughts so clearly and even used her own words and attitude to block her from saying anything. She could only let the other party tear off the fake skin on her body bit by bit. Chu Yufei's expression was extremely ugly. She regretted it a little now. If she had known that Luo Xiaoqi was so familiar with these methods, she would not have been unable to swallow her anger and deliberately provoked Chu Tianming and Chu Xiaofeng. But now, he had completely destroyed his image. She really went for wool and came home shorn. Chu Yufei's expression was ugly, but Luo Qingtong did not pay much attention to her. She changed the topic and looked at Chu Tianming and the others. You have too many people, and our young Master Feng is alone. He's no match for you. Since you all think that this is our young Master Feng's fault. All right then, we'll compensate you with all these spiritual herbs. But at the same time, we also have a request. That is, you are not allowed to mention this matter in the future. It will damage the reputation of our young Master Feng. In addition to that, these mercenaries TS right now. After you get the spiritual to Chiu, Teat, to them to you to protect T's. Said Qingtong. Com T S to test T tos tu to T to S. In this case, you can distribute these spiritual herbs as you wish. We don't care. The moment Luo Qingtong said that, Chu Xiaofeng and the rest were shocked. Xiaoqi. Young Master Xiaoqi, this won't do. Everyone was excited and touched. They were touched because Luo Qingtong defended them. They were excited because they were not willing to let Chu Tianming and the others off so easily. Chapter 2555. His gaze towards Chu Yufei was filled with even more unspeakable hatred. She was really disgusting. Not only did she deliberately sow discord, but she also put on an act. Her attitude of persuading him to take out the spiritual herbs was really disgusting. If it weren't for her, Chu Tianming and the others wouldn't have had the chance to make trouble. This Chu Yufei, all her gentleness and kindness were all fake. In fact, her thoughts were indescribably sinister. Everyone's eyes were filled with anger. On the other hand, Chu Tianming and the others were pleasantly surprised. This was especially true for Chu Ku. Her eyes immediately lit up and she began to shout. Okay. Luo Xiaoqi, you said it. Chu Xiaofeng, you won't go back on her words, right? Chu Ku raised her head and looked at Chu Xiaofeng. I remember you said before that her words are your words. Now, you won't go back on your words, right? Chu Ku's face was filled with ridicule. Previously, when Chu Xiaofeng listened to everything Luo Qingtong said, she thought that his brain was really kicked by a donkey. How could he listen to a mercenary like that? But now, she was very glad that Chu Xiaofeng listened to Luo Qingtong. Otherwise, how could they let Chu Xiaofeng do as Luo Qingtong said? It was also Chu Xiaofeng's own stupidity that allowed them to have something on him. But the stupidest one was Luo Qingtong. She actually used these spiritual herbs in exchange for the protection rights of those mercenaries. Why? Was she afraid that Chu Tianming and the others would kill these mercenaries? Or was she afraid that these mercenaries would be at a disadvantage in the hands of Chu Tianming and the others? She was a saint, but it was a pity that Chu Xiaofeng risked his life to deal with those 1,000 silkworms. Now, these spiritual herbs were all taken advantage of by her and the others. Speaking of which, they should thank Luo Xiaoqi. Chu Ku thought so and suddenly sneered. She was indescribably proud of herself. And Chu Tianming and the others thought so too. They thought of Luo Qingtong asking them to remove the protection rights of Old Shen and the others and seemed to have found the reason why Luo Qingtong did so. Suddenly, they looked at Luo Qingtong, Chu Xiaofeng and the others with eyes full of ridicule. This Chu Xiaofeng was really a pig head. He actually let a mercenary under him make the decision. Now, all of these spiritual herbs were theirs. Chu Tianming and the others were pleased with themselves. After glancing at Chu Xiaofeng complacently, they immediately said in a cold voice, "Chu Xiaofeng, since your subordinates are so generous, then we will respectfully accept your offer. As for these traitorous mercenaries, it's up to you whether you want them or not. Naturally, we will remove their protection rights." For the children of the Tianfeng Chu clan, once they were selected as mercenaries, unless the employer agreed, the mercenaries under them would have to guarantee their safety. Now that Chu Tianming's group and Old Shen's group had been relieved of their protection rights, it meant that Old Shen and the others did not need to care about their lives. As for Chu Xiaofeng and the others, they were unable to accept Old Shen and the others. But if they insisted on following Chu Xiaofeng and the others and not joining their team, it would not be a violation of the rules. Therefore, Chu Tianming and the others all thought that Luo Qingtong was exchanging spiritual herbs with them for Old Shen and the others. And because of the previous beating, Chu Tianming and the others had long been displeased with Old Shen and the others. They were indeed planning to wait until they met up with the other children of the Tianfeng Chu clan before dealing with Old Shen and the others. Chapter 2556. Anyway, even if they left the abandoned continent in the future, they would have plenty of opportunities to deal with these people. They were not in a hurry now. Moreover, it would be easier for them to take action once they left the abandoned continent. Speaking of which, this young man named Luo Xiaoqi was really naive. Did he really think that they could not do anything to him after he escaped this disaster? Chu Tianming and the others sneered and removed the protection rights from Old Shen and the others. Both sides swore to the heavenly Tao. Soon, Old Shen and the others were free from the restraint of Chu Tianming and the others. They retreated to Luo Qingtong's side excitedly. The latter looked at the smug and arrogant Chu Tianming and the others, raised her hand and made a "please" gesture. "You guys, start picking the spiritual herbs now." As she spoke, she asked them to make way for the path to the spiritual meadow. "Humph, at least you know what's good for you. Chu Xiaofeng, you really found a good subordinate. Much more generous than you. Then, it would be impolite of us to refuse." Chu Tianming and the others laughed loudly. Chu Ku's head was even higher. She looked at Chu Xiaofeng and sneered. "I just gave you a quarter and you didn't want it. Now you don't even have 3/4. You gave the control of your team to a mercenary, and a young man at that. Chu Xiaofeng, calling you stupid is already a compliment. If I were you, I would immediately kick this Luo Xiaoqi out of the team. Otherwise, I don't know what kind of losses you will suffer in the future. Of course, that's a matter for the future. Now, these spiritual herbs belong to us. You guys just stay here and watch. Sister Yufei, don't you think so?" Chu Ku looked at Chu Yufei and said. After Luo Qingtong tore off Chu Yufei's fake skin, Chu Ku regarded her as one of her own. It turned out that Sister Yufei did not mean to say that to her. She did it to show Luo Qingtong and the others. Unfortunately, Luo Qingtong and Chu Xiaofeng did not fall for it. As she said this, she suddenly felt hatred in her heart. Chu Yufei looked in the direction of Luo Qingtong. For some reason, he felt that something was amiss. This boy named Luo Xiaoqi didn't seem to be an easy person to deal with. Why would she suddenly give up on these spiritual herbs? Just for these mercenaries? Her gaze swept past Old Shen and the others. Although he didn't believe it, there didn't seem to be any place where Luo Qingtong and the others had tampered with. Chu Tianming and the others were the first to arrive at the spiritual herb land. Chu Yufei thought about it and didn't think there was anything wrong with it. It could only be said that although Luo Qingtong was a scheming person, she was too soft-hearted in the end to actually use these elixirs in exchange for the freedom of these mercenaries. What a joke! Chu Yufei sneered in her heart. She felt that Luo Qingtong's soft-heartedness was laughable. However, she did not show it on her face. She only nodded gently at Chu Ku. Her persona had almost collapsed. But so what? Chu Xiaofeng and the others had a grudge against Chu Ku and the others. If she said that Chu Xiaofeng and the others deliberately slandered Chu Ku, because they didn't get along with her, who would believe Chu Xiaofeng and the others? As for Chu Tianming, Chu Ku, and the others, they were idiots. She could easily trick them back. Chu Yufei didn't care at all. She just stared at Yi Qianxian. She saw that he had been holding Luo Qingtong until now and showed no signs of letting her go. Chapter 2557. Chu Yufei gritted her teeth in her heart. She believed that her charm was not weak and was much higher than that idiot Chu Ku. However, this man, who she couldn't take her eyes off, didn't even look her in the eye. Previously, she wanted to take the opportunity to fall on Yi Qianxian, but the latter avoided her. Instead, he approached Luo Qingtong. How could Chu Yufei accept such an obvious difference in treatment? Fortunately, Luo Xiaoqi was a man. That man was gay, so he turned a blind eye to her. It was not that she was not charming enough. Chu Yufei felt much better when she thought of this. She forcibly shifted her gaze away from Yi Qianxian, then went to the spiritual grass field with Chu Ku, to pick the spiritual herbs there. Luo Qingtong had almost stripped her of her fake skin. She could not be bothered to put on an act in front of Luo Qingtong and the others. She did not even say a word of courtesy. She lowered her head and directly picked the spiritual herbs. She would not leave a single one of the spiritual herbs here for Luo Qingtong and the others. Let the other party pay the price for her generosity. Chu Yufei sneered. She seemed to have seen the scene of Luo Qingtong being reprimanded by Chu Xiaofeng and the others after she and the others left. After all, Luo Qingtong had lost so many spiritual herbs and had generously given them to them. How could Chu Xiaofeng and the others tolerate this? They did not make things difficult for them at this time because they cared about their reputation and did not want to be seen as a joke. Chu Yufei was so certain in her heart. Suddenly, the speed at which she picked these spiritual herbs became even faster. The group of people picked all the spiritual herbs like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds. After a while, there was not a single green plant on the grass field. Chu Tianming and the others were so crazy that they did not even let go of the weeds and pulled them all out. After doing all this, Chu Yufei, Chu Ku, and the others left with Chu Tianming and the others. The two of them had already planned this beforehand. If it weren't for the fact that they wanted to leave with Chu Tianming and the others, how could they not give any face to Luo Qingtong and the others just now? Humph, Chu Xiaofeng and the others thought that they could only rely on him. Now that Chu Tianming and the others had appeared, if they followed them, they would be able to meet up with the others sooner or later. Especially since Chu Tianming and the others had just told them. On their way here, they saw another group of children from the Tianfeng Chu clan. It was a good opportunity for them to seek refuge with them. After receiving this news, Chu Ku, and Chu Yufei no longer had any worries. The group left smugly. Chu Tianming and the others were about to say some harsh words, but when they saw Yi Qianxian holding Luo Qingtong not far away, they felt a chill in their hearts. They suddenly remembered that there was a super powerful expert here. Although they didn't know how strong Yi Qianxian was, it was obvious that they couldn't afford to provoke him. They were afraid that they would have to find the top children of their clans. Only the guards around the ladder would be comparable to this man. With this thought in mind, the group of people didn't dare to say anything more. One by one, they took the spiritual herbs and left quickly. Even Chu Ku, who wanted to make a fuss, was pulled away by them. Chapter 25:58. Lil 7, I know you did it for our own good. But this is too easy for Chu Tianming and the rest. Chu Xiaofeng felt aggrieved. Chu Tianming and the rest were too shameless. If not for Luo Qingtong's offer to exchange for old Shen and the rest's protection rights, Chu Xiaofeng would not have let it go so easily. With just Chu Tianming and the others, even the guards beside them did not support them, and they wanted to fight with him. They even dared to covet his spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs. It was infuriating. However, Luo Qingtong had helped him so much along the way, and he could still get these spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs. Therefore, Chu Xiaofeng could only swallow his anger and almost choke to death. Gui Feng and the rest were the same. If not for Luo Qingtong's offer to exchange these spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs for old Shen and the rest's protection rights, they would have already attacked. Chu Tianming and the rest were too shameless. As for Chu Ku, and Chu Yufei, they were simply ungrateful to the extreme. Chu Ku, was needless to say. They were the ones who begged them to take them in, but they sold them out in the blink of an eye. If they had known, they would not have taken them in. As for Chu Yufei, they did not expect her to be so two-faced. To think that they thought she was different from Chu Ku, They were just burdened by the other party. Everyone was furious, but Luo Qingtong's expression was very leisurely. What's the hurry? Who said they got off easy? Let me tell you, those spiritual herbs can't be used at all. All right, hurry up and disperse. Get ready to work. Chu Xiaofeng and the rest were vexed and depressed. When they heard Luo Qingtong's words, they were instantly confused. Lil 7, what work? If not for the fact that Luo Qingtong's expression was very calm and did not look like she was talking nonsense, Chu Xiaofeng and the rest would have suspected that Luo Qingtong was too angry with Chu Ku, and the rest. Why was she speaking so strangely? Yes, young Master Shao Qi, all the spiritual herbs on the spiritual grass field have been plucked by Chu Tianming and the rest. What kind of work are we starting? The mercenaries didn't know what Luo Qingtong was talking about. Old Shen and the others, in particular, were both excited and moved. Originally, they were prepared to resolutely carry out Luo Qingtong's orders. But what were they going to do now? Everyone was both depressed and surprised. As for what Luo Qingtong said, that those spiritual grasses could not be used at all, they did not take it to heart at all. Those spirit grasses grew on these spirit grasses and were protected by the 1,000 silkworms' threads. How could they not be used? There was an abundance of spiritual energy inside, so it was definitely a spiritual herb. Little 7th young master was purposely saying nice things to comfort them. As the crowd thought of this, they felt even more touched by Luo Qingtong. What are you guys thinking? Luo Qingtong looked at the thoughts and emotions on their faces and was speechless. Did she look like someone who would suffer such a loss? But then Luo Qingtong remembered that she was Luo Shaoqi, and these mercenaries were not Su Yu and the rest who had been following her all the time. It was normal for them not to know her character. Thinking of this, she immediately said to Chu Xiaofeng and the rest, those spiritual herbs really can't be used. That's the beast lure grass that the 1,000 silkworms use to hunt prey and lure food over. Chapter 25:59. As Luo Qingtong spoke, she raised her hand and pointed at the silk thread surrounding the field. Didn't you notice? The entanglement of these silk threads is exactly the same as what you saw in the open space previously. It's even tighter. There's more. Luo Qingtong raised her hand and pointed at the fertile land under the field. The nutrients in this land are much richer than in other places. And those bones, do you think they belong to the 1,000 silkworms? Hearing Luo Qingtong's words, everyone immediately looked in the direction she was pointing. Indeed, under the spiritual grass, where Chu Tianming and the rest had turned over the soil, the bones of some magical beasts could be vaguely seen. When these bones landed in front of everyone previously, they didn't think much of it. However, after Luo Qingtong's reminder, everyone realized that the appearance of these bones seemed to be different. Unless the 1,000 silkworms still had the mood to bury the corpses after killing these magical beasts and casually build a cemetery for them, the bones gathered here only proved one thing. This was the place where the 1,000 silkworms ate. Damn! Chu Xiaofeng and the rest's expressions turned from dark to bright. Those spiritual grass were actually the beast bait grass that the 1,000 silkworms used to lure their food? Didn't that mean that whoever held onto those grass would be unlucky? It was no wonder that Luo Qingtong gave these spiritual herbs to Chu Tianming and the rest without hesitation. She even exchanged old Shen and the rest's protection rights. Oh my god. Chu Tianming and the rest were probably going to be cheated to death. Everyone was excited and expectant. If Chu Tianming and the rest had not already gone far, they would have chased after them and watched a good show. It was 2F** King satisfying. Brilliant. Really brilliant. Chu Xiaofeng gave Luo Qingtong a thumbs up. He felt an indescribable sense of exaltation. Chu Tianming and the rest were too arrogant just now. Now that he heard that they were cheated by Luo Qingtong and that the spiritual grass they obtained was a hot potato, he was instantly overjoyed. However, he soon felt regretful. Sigh, what a pity. Those spiritual grasses are beast-luring grasses. Otherwise, the spiritual qi would be very useful. As Chu Xiaofeng said this, Luo Qingtong immediately laughed. You think too much. These are just ordinary weeds. Because the 1,000 silkworms infuse their aura and power into the weeds at regular intervals, they look like spirit herbs. This spiritual qi cannot be absorbed by cultivators, Lin Feng explained. When the time comes, it will all disperse. That's why I said those spiritual herbs can't be used at all. Luo Qingtong's words made Chu Xiaofeng and the others widen their eyes. In other words, not only would Chu Ku, and the others be hunted down by the magical beasts, they would also not be able to use the spiritual energy within the spiritual herbs. Then they were more than just unlucky. That was simply bad luck. He was so unlucky. Chu Xiaofeng and the others' faces twitched violently. Yi Qianxian lowered his head and looked at the side of the young man's face that was covered with birthmarks. The light in his eyes was abnormally deep and flickering. He didn't know if the other party had noticed that her temperament was becoming more and more different from the original Luo Xiaoqi. Was it because she was by his side that she was unconsciously relaxed? Yi Qinming's eyes were solemn. An idea in his heart was becoming clearer and clearer, more and more certain. He only needed to do the final verification. Tonight, he would see how the other party would conceal it. Chapter 2560. Luo Qingtong had no idea what Yi Qianxian was thinking. At this moment, she was instructing everyone to pluck out the spiritual herbs guarded by the real 1,000 silkworms. It turned out that those 1,000 silkworms were all burrowing animals. The spiritual herbs they were guarding also grew in the underground caverns. Coincidentally, it was right below the spirit grass field. In fact, this was a very normal thing. Because those 1,000 silkworms had to rest after eating their fill. And the place where they rested was naturally where those spiritual herbs grew. This way, they could better guard those spiritual herbs. And those pseudo-spiritual herbs, in addition to luring those magical beasts for them to eat. At the same time, the remaining corpses were also the best fertilizer to nourish those spiritual herbs they guarded. Therefore, the real location of those spiritual herbs was under the pseudo-spiritual grass. Chu Xiaofeng and the rest searched around according to Luo Qingtong's instructions. Soon, they found those hidden entrances. After entering, there were large patches of spiritual herbs hidden inside. The amount of spirit grasses here was countless times that of the spirit grass field above. Chu Xiaofeng and the rest were happy in their hearts. The depression they felt from being angered by Chu Tianming and the rest's shamelessness had all dissipated. If Chu Tianming and the rest knew that those spiritual herbs they had schemed and shamelessly snatched were actually fake and inferior products. Not only that, but they were also the garbage that the 1,000 silkworms used to lure those magical beasts to eat. What kind of expression would they have? It was a pity that they couldn't see it. Otherwise, they would definitely appreciate it. The group returned to the camp with a full load. And those mercenaries who were seriously injured by Chu Ku, and Chu Yufei left with Chu Tianming and the rest. After knowing that Chu Ku, and Chu Yufei had left with Chu Tianming and the rest and had abandoned them and given up their right to guard them, their faces flashed with joy and relief instead of anger. Because they didn't want to follow Chu Yufei and Chu Ku anymore. Of these two people, one was headstrong and self-opinionated, and the other was scheming and went along with Chu Ku. The mercenaries didn't feel safe at all in their hands. Previously, they still had some hope for Chu Yufei. However, after hearing Guifeng, Old Chen, and the others talk about Chu Yufei, Chu Ku, and the others' performance in the 1,000 silkworm territory, everyone gave up. At this moment, they had gathered together with Old Chen and the others. Although they didn't have an employer that they needed to follow, at the same time, they couldn't enter Chu Xiaofeng's group and directly report to Chu Xiaofeng. But as free people, they could travel with Luo Qingtong and the others. In this way, it was equivalent to them joining Chu Xiaofeng and the others' team. It was just that they would not directly obey their orders. Of course, they were loyal to Luo Qingtong. The group of mercenaries was completely convinced by this young man. Previously, they had insisted on having Luo Qingtong participate in this mission because they had taken a fancy to the role this youngster could play in this mission. However, they had not expected that Luo Qingtong would do so much better than they had imagined. Chapter 2561. If it weren't for Luo Qingtong, they simply couldn't imagine that they would have no casualties when facing those 1,000 silkworms. That's right, in Luo Qingtong's team, no one died at all. There were injured people, but no one died. Not only that, in Old Chen's team, except for those who died because of Chu Tianming and the others' rash advance and stubbornness, no one else died after Luo Qingtong's team arrived. Even the injuries were only minor. Because those 1,000 silkworms were trapped by their own silk threads, their lethality was limited. At the same time, everyone looked out for each other and helped each other. Compared to the other teams who swept the snow in front of their own door, this was much better. In Luo Qingtong's team, there was no strife or mutual scheming. Because they knew that under Luo Qingtong's leadership, they wouldn't necessarily have too many casualties, everyone worked very hard and helped each other. Once a person was entangled by a silk thread, before he was strangled to death, someone immediately cut off the silk thread entangling him, allowing him to escape. In this way, in Luo Qingtong's team, there weren't even many people who were injured after the battle. Many people were still too greedy and rash. They were anxious to kill those 1,000 silkworms, so they suffered some injuries. When everyone returned to the camp and counted the number of people and the results of the battle, they discovered this and were shocked. Especially Old Chen and the others. They had lost a lot of people. As a result, when they went back to check, Luo Qingtong's team had almost no casualties. The number of people who followed Chu Xiaofeng before was the same number now. In their opinion, this was very inconceivable. Because along the way, even if they didn't count the losses in the 1,000 silkworms territory, they had lost a lot of people. The number of mercenary groups had sharply decreased. But Luo Qingtong's team was different. Everyone sighed in their hearts. The people of the Red Flame mercenary group were really lucky. And those who were chosen by Chu Xiaofeng were the same. Fortunately, they were also on the same path as Luo Qingtong and the others. Everyone secretly swore in their hearts. Except for Luo Qingtong, they would not listen to anyone else. If Luo Qingtong told them to go east, they would never go west. Following young Master Shao Qi would give them meat to eat. The group of people happily divided the spiritual herbs. Their thoughts were incomparably firm. Luo Qingtong, along with Yi Qianxian and the others, was looking at the corpses of the 1,000 silkworms that were transported back by the mercenaries. Each of these corpses represented a set of meridians that could be recast for Yi Qianxian. Luo Qingtong attached great importance to them and personally came to check. Especially the corpse of the 1,000 filaments worm. Luo Qingtong looked at Bei Qing and Feng Yu with a faint smile. The latter and the others kept wandering around the corpse of the 1,000 filaments king worm. They wanted to speak several times, but they were forced to swallow it back. It was obvious that Luo Xiaoqi would not give the corpse of the 1,000 filaments king worm to them. After all, if they could see that the corpse of the 1,000 filaments king worm was extraordinary, how could Luo Xiaoqi not see it? She would give them some corpses of the 1,000 filaments king worm, but not the one of the 1,000 filaments king worm. It was precisely because they knew that this was the case that everyone became anxious. Chapter 2562. Yi Qianxian's treatment of Luo Xiaoqi was beyond their expectations. Originally, he was completely indifferent to Luo Qingtong. But at this moment, he was simply indulging Luo Xiaoqi too much. He had been holding Luo Xiaoqi in his arms and didn't let her go until they returned to the camp. Others couldn't tell, but Bei Qing, Feng Yu, and the others had been with Yi Qianxian all the time. How could they not know their master's temperament? Except for Luo Qingtong, he didn't care about other people at all. Why was he so nice to Luo Xiaoqi this time? Master, you mustn't do something wrong like replacing the original with a fake to relieve your yearning for the real thing. Even if Luo Xiaoqi was like an evil doctor, she wasn't an evil doctor. Master, please wake up. Everyone shouted in their hearts. Not to mention Feng Yu, who was more thoughtful, even Bei Qing and the others, who didn't think with their brains, felt strange when they saw Yi Qianxian's attitude towards Luo Xiaoqi. What they were most afraid of was that Yi Qianxian would make a substitute. If the evil doctor found out, it would be over. More importantly, this Luo Xiaoqi was a man. Master, even if you want to find a substitute, you should find a woman. Everyone was indescribably frightened. Looking at the king worm and Yi Qianxian, they were aggrieved, but they didn't dare to say anything. Yi Qianxian looked at Luo Qingtong indifferently and said in a low voice, "These 1,000 filaments are all here. How are you going to distribute them?" He looked at Luo Qingtong, who said without hesitation, "We'll divide these 1,000 filaments into 3 and 7. You get 3, I get 7. This king worm is mine." In fact, Luo Qingtong didn't want to give all these 1,000 filaments to Yi Qianxian. But she was still Luo Xiaoqi. If he was too generous, his identity would be exposed. Luo Qingtong couldn't reveal her identity yet. Therefore, she immediately made her choice. In any case, there was no difference between leaving these 1,000 silkworms with her and Yi Qianxian and the others. However, Bei Qing and Feng Yu didn't know what Luo Qingtong was thinking. Everyone was extremely depressed as they watched Luo Qingtong collect the corpses of the 1,000 silkworms. Especially the king worm. He almost rushed up and snatched it. But when they saw Yi Qianxian standing motionlessly at the side, the crowd immediately withered. Not because of anything else, but because their master hadn't said anything yet, so how could they dare to act on their own? Therefore, they could only watch helplessly as Luo Qingtong collected all the corpses. Yi Qianxian asked Luo Qingtong, "What are you going to do with these corpses?" Hearing this, Bei Qing, Feng Yu, and the others pricked up their ears in an instant. Did their master want to ask Luo Xiaoqi what she was going to do with these 1,000 silkworms? If she didn't have any special use for them, he would buy them from her? If that was the case, it would be good. With this thought in mind, everyone's spirits were lifted. However, before they could be excited for long, they heard Luo Qingtong's voice. "Oh, this?" Luo Qingtong smiled. "This is for a very, very important person to me." Luo Qingtong looked at Yi Qianxian with a smile, and her eyes quickly circled around him several times. Chapter 2563. This kind of confession was good enough, right? When the man found out about her identity and wanted to settle accounts with her, she could use this to leave a good impression on him and make him reluctant to punish her too much. As Luo Qingtong thought about it, she felt elated. She felt that she was too awesome. Yi Qianxian's eyes lit up when he heard her words. His gaze swept past Luo Qingtong's smiling face. For some reason, even the hideous birthmark on her face was pleasing to the eye, and he felt much more comfortable. Was she someone very important to him? His lips curled up slightly as he glanced meaningfully at Luo Qingtong's face. Then, without saying anything, he left the place. Bei Qing, Feng Yu, and the others were still waiting for their master to discuss with Luo Xiaoqi how to buy the king worm. However, their master just asked Luo Xiaoqi a question and then left. Nothing. Everyone's eyes widened as they watched their master leave. They couldn't come back to their senses at all. Oh my God. Master, what the hell is wrong with you? Bei Qing, Feng Yu, and the others collapsed indescribably. Luo Qingtong watched Yi Qianxian leave with a smile. Oh, I got away with it. She was very happy. After giving herself a V sign, she happily went to check on the injured mercenaries. Luo Qingtong had elixirs with her. And they were quite effective. But she couldn't expose her identity, right? Therefore, her elixirs were useless and she couldn't take them out. But it wasn't a problem for her. There were countless spiritual herbs on this abandoned continent. There was bound to be a way to cure the injuries of these mercenaries by combining them with each other. Luo Qingtong couldn't cure them immediately, but she could speed up their recovery. The heart of the continent would open soon. When the Tian Luo grass appeared, she might need these people's help. Therefore, it was best that they were fine. Yu Mingxian was left in the camp because he didn't have the strength, and didn't follow Luo Qingtong to the Thousand Silkworms territory. When he heard what Luo Qingtong did in the Thousand Silkworms territory, his eyes darkened. He had seen clearly that it was impossible to take the opportunity to gain Luo Qingtong's trust. The young man was like a fish in water on this abandoned continent. His meticulous observation skills were simply terrifying. One had to know that this wasn't his full strength. Yu Mingxian's eyes were extremely gloomy when he thought of the inscription ability Luo Qingtong had shown in the Tianfeng inscription city and the strength she had shown when she destroyed his inscription array. Perhaps, he should change his strategy. After leaving the abandoned continent, he would immediately send people to capture her and bring her to the Central Inscriptionist Union. He was wrong before. He wanted to get his hands on the god's inscription before his foster father and the others found out. But she was so difficult to get close to. Shouldn't he let her experience a life and death situation before rescuing her? Wouldn't it be easier to gain her trust? Yu Mingxian felt that his idea of impersonating Yu Xian was really stupid. Of course, at that time, he didn't know Luo Qingtong was so difficult to deal with. He didn't know that she was a woman. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't have done this. But it wasn't too late to change. Yu Mingxian's eyes were cold. Chapter 2564. The only thing he didn't know was the identity of the man with the white jade mask. Who on earth was he? What were the origins of those people around him? What was the relationship between him and Luo Xiaoqi? Was it because of him that Luo Xiaoqi disguised herself as a man? Yu Mingxian's eyes were full of curiosity. If that was the case, he might have to guard against him when he attacked Luo Xiaoqi. Out of trust in his intuition, Yu Mingxian could feel that perhaps Yi Qianxian would be the only obstacle for him to attack Luo Qingtong. If he had known that they might know each other, he would have attacked Luo Qingtong long ago. He would never have given her a chance to travel with Yi Qianxian. But fortunately, the two of them hadn't recognized each other yet, so he still had a lot of room to maneuver. Yu Mingxian's eyes were slightly cold. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his eyes, and then he quickly calmed down. At night, Luo Qingtong held her quilt and ran to Yi Qianxian again. She stood in front of Yi Qianxian's tent, pacing back and forth, thinking about what excuse she could use to sleep with Yi Qianxian today. Tut, it seemed a bit silly to use Yu Xian as an excuse to sleep with her. After all, it was not like before, when Yu Xian suddenly came over and it was not easy to set up a tent in the middle of the night. She could totally set up a new tent for him to sleep in. Oh, I got it. Luo Qingtong's eyes lit up. She suddenly had an idea. Didn't Yu Xian have the identity of a boy toy? She said that he had a phobia of men, so it was safe for him to stay in her tent. After all, no one could harass him in her tent. So he could only live in her tent. And she was not used to living with others. Oh, no, she was not used to living with Yu Xian. After all, she was taking advantage of him. Of course, she could only come to his tent. Wow, she was really a genius. Luo Qingtong thought happily and gave herself a thumbs up in her heart. She immediately hugged her quilt and went into Yi Qianxian's tent. As for why living with Yu Xian would mean taking advantage of him, but living with Yi Qianxian wouldn't be a problem at all. Wasn't that easy to explain? Yu Xian was someone's boy toy, but Yi Qianxian wasn't. Of course, Luo Qingtong had completely forgotten that she had taken the initiative to hold Yi Qianren's hand during the day and was mistaken for a homosexual. In the tent, Yi Qianxian sat on the bed, looking at the reflection of the youth on the tent outside, his face calm and composed. He played with a certain ring in his hand, wanting to see how long the other party would be loitering outside before finding a suitable reason to enter his tent. Of course, if she couldn't find a suitable reason, he would find one for her. For example, if the tent he made for Yu Xian suddenly collapsed for unknown reasons. However, Yi Qianxian believed that Luo Qingtong would find a suitable reason to enter his tent. After all, she was so cunning. Humph. Yi Qianxian snorted softly. As expected, he soon saw Luo Qingtong loitering outside his tent. She dawdled for a while, then rushed into his tent. Obviously, she had found a good reason. Chapter 2565. As soon as Luo Qingtong entered the tent, she saw Yi Qianxian sitting on the bed, looking at her from the corner of his eyes. The man's figure was tall and stalwart, almost occupying the entire rattan bed. He was wearing a loose black patterned brocade robe. Because he had just taken a bath, the collar was slightly open, revealing the firm and strong muscles of his chest. There were still some water droplets hanging on it, making the inner clothes slightly wet and sticking to the skin. It was really a feast for the eyes. Oh my God. This man was really becoming more and more tempting. Luo Qingtong looked away with difficulty. What to do? Before she knew that this man was Yi Qianxian, Luo Qingtong didn't think that he was good looking at all. But now that she knew that he was her man, she really found him pleasing to the eye. She really wanted to pounce on him. It was a pity that she wasn't Luo Qingtong. If she pounced on him like this, she would definitely be kicked away by him and thrown away. Luo Qingtong's face was full of frustration. She couldn't even kiss, hug, and raise her man in front of her. Why was she in such a miserable state? Luo Qingtong cursed in her heart those people from the Inscription Association of the Federation of Inscription Masters who made her unable to expose her identity. Especially those men in black who were tracking her whereabouts. Then they walked in front of Yi Qianxian with a sullen face. At this moment, Yi Qianxian's cold and indifferent voice rang out. Envy? When Yi Qianxian's voice sounded, Luo Qingtong was stunned. She looked up at Yi Qianxian with a puzzled face. What envy? Her eyes clearly showed her doubts. Here. Yi Qianxian's lips, which were hidden behind the mask, slightly curled up. He raised his hand and pointed to his chest. Over there, the firm muscles and veins were extremely alluring. You envy? Yi Qianxian's tone was indescribably calm. Just now, you were staring at me. Cough, cough, cough. When Yi Qianxian's words came out, Luo Qingtong coughed violently. Oh my God, I was caught peeping. Was her gaze so obvious? Luo Qingtong's heart was bleeding. Cough, cough, that, I'm quite envious. After thinking about it, she couldn't find a suitable reason to explain her peeping. Luo Qingtong admitted that she was envious. In fact, she wasn't envious at all. She also's breasts. They were bigger and softer than his. Just as Luo Qingtong was trying to clear her name, she suddenly felt a hand covering her left chest. Then, that hand pinched her little bun that looked and felt extremely flat on the outside, neither lightly nor heavily. He gave it a squeeze. Luo Qingtong was dumbfounded. She looked at Yi Qianxian as if she had been struck by lightning. She couldn't come back to her senses for a long time. After pinching her breasts, the latter said coldly, "Don't be envious. You can practice it in the future." His voice was incomparably cold and calm. His tone was also very calm. But that wasn't the main point, okay? The main point was that he was pinching her breasts. Luo Qingtong's small illusion pill could make people unable to detect that her flat chest was fake. But when she was touched, it still felt like her little white rabbit being kneaded and played with. Ah ah ah. Oh my God. Luo Qingtong felt the scorching heat from the man's palm on her chest. Her entire body stiffened. Chapter 2566. Bang! The curtain of the tent was abruptly pulled open from the outside. Then, a figure rushed in excitedly from outside. "Master, we made the bed for you." "It's done." Bei Qing looked at the scene in the tent with a dumbfounded expression. He saw his master's hand on Luo Xiaoqi's chest. Luo Xiaoqi's face turned red and her body stiffened. Oh my God! What's going on? Bei Qing opened his eyes wide in an instant. He looked at his master's hand on Luo Qingtong's chest and stared at it for a dozen times. Finally, he was sure that it was his master's hand. It was not someone else's hand, nor was he wrong. It was his master's hand. Ah. Ah. What Feng Yu said was true. Did his master really fall in love with someone else? And he fell in love with Luo Xiaoqi? Otherwise, how could he explain his master's behavior? Even they rarely touched their own master. Not to mention he did such an ambiguous thing to someone else. Bei Qing thought for a while. Only Yi Qianxian had made an exception for Luo Qingtong. And now, Yi Qianxian made an exception for Luo Xiaoqi. Could it be that the evil doctor in men's clothing was master's true love? Now that he found Luo Xiaoqi, who was very similar to the evil doctor in men's clothing, he fell in love with someone else. Master, he was actually gay. Bei Qing was dumbfounded. Yi Qianxian glanced at him indifferently. Without saying anything, he calmly took back his hand that was on Luo Qingtong's left chest and gently squeezed it. Yes, although her breasts felt flat to the touch. But it was soft. It was so soft, it didn't feel like a man's chest. Yi Qianxian snorted. He was almost certain in his heart. But he still wanted to make one last verification. "Bring it in," he said to Bei Qing. The latter was dumbfounded for a while. Only when she heard his words did she regain her senses. "Master, no, young master." Bei Qing looked at Yi Qianxian. She wanted to say something but stopped herself. She couldn't stay calm. Master, you really can't walk on the path of no return of being a homosexual. And the evil doctor is so good, you can't abandon her just because she's a woman. Ah. Master. Bei Qing's heart was roaring crazily, but on the surface, he had a silly look on his face as he lifted the wooden bed behind him and placed it in front of Yi Qianren. Young master, just as he made up his mind to advise Yi Qianxian, the man's voice rang out. All right, you can leave now. Yi Qianxian's voice was cold, carrying an unquestionable authority and command. Bei Qing had no choice but to rush out with tears in her eyes. Ah. Feng Yu, what should we do? Master is really gay. And he made a big bed for him and Luo Xiaoqi to sleep together. That's right. What Beiqing had sent over was a wooden bed that was more than 5 meters wide. It filled up the entire tent. Previously, he thought it was strange. Why did his master suddenly ask him to make a wooden bed, and why did he have to make it so wide? But, just as Beiqing was about to break down and run out, Luo Qingtong was also stunned by the big bed more than 5 meters wide. Well? Brother, why did you make such a big bed? She couldn't help asking. The bed almost filled the whole tent. The space left was not enough for Luo Qingtong to sleep on the floor. Was she going to sleep at the entrance of the tent? No way. Chapter 2567. At this moment, Luo Qingtong completely forgot about the attack on her chest. Her heart was indescribably anxious. This man suddenly made such a big bed. Could it be that he didn't want her to sleep here? He was too cunning. It wasn't easy for her to find a suitable reason, but he actually used this trick. Luo Qingtong fiercely gritted her teeth. She really underestimated this man. When did he become so difficult to deal with? Where was the innocent and cute Yi Qianxian? Luo Qingtong's heart was indescribably gloomy. Yi Qianxian glanced at her lightly, then said, I think the previous bed was too small. I can't sleep well. When he said this, Luo Qingtong instantly burst into laughter. Bullshit. Damn it, he slept so soundly last night. This bed was obviously made to guard against her. Luo Qingtong's heart was gloomy. She stared at the bed for a long time, as if she couldn't use her eyes to split the bed in half. Then, with a stifled heart, she picked up her quilt and turned to leave. At this moment, Yi Qianxian's cold voice sounded from behind her. Where are you going? To sleep outside. Luo Qingtong's face was full of annoyance. Sleeping at the entrance of the camp was too undignified. And to be entangled to this extent, the man would inevitably be suspicious. She was definitely going to sleep outside. It was a pity that she had to stay up late to keep watch tonight. Forget it, I'll just take it as a contribution to the camp. As Luo Qingtong thought about it, she carried the blanket and walked out gloomily. However, before she could take a step forward, Yi Qianxian grabbed her shoulder. Sleep here. Yi Qianxian's voice was cold. He didn't make this big bed for Luo Qingtong to stay up late with those people outside. Previously, he couldn't bear to let this person sleep outside in the wilderness. Now, it was even more impossible. Really? Luo Qingtong's heart was first happy, then shocked. She hugged her quilt, looked at Yi Qianxian warily, and asked, Didn't you hate it when I slept here before? She had wasted so much time pestering him before, but could only sleep on the floor of the camp. Now, this man actually wanted her to sleep on the bed? Did he see something? Luo Qingtong's eyes turned slightly, staring at Yi Qianxian's face. Unfortunately, the man's face was covered by a mask, so she couldn't see his expression. You know that I don't like people close to me? Yi Qianxian's. This person had been pestering him all day. If it wasn't for the special feeling he had for her, he wouldn't even know how he died. Now she knew to use this matter to test him. Yi Qianxian's expression was cold. He thought of how this person had flaunted her existence in front of him. There were several times when he almost couldn't control himself and wanted to attack her. His voice was indescribably cold. Anyway, the bed is here. Sleep if you want. But once you're out of this camp, don't come back in the future. Yi Qianxian's voice was cold. After speaking, he turned around and lay down on the bed. He didn't even bother to look at Luo Qingtong. His attitude made Luo Qingtong feel relieved. She thought about it and felt that she might be overthinking. Chapter 2568. Wouldn't she explode on the spot? What's more, she believed that she didn't reveal any flaws. At present, this man's identity was her biggest shield. As for why Yi Qianxian let her sleep here, perhaps it was because she got so many thousand silkworms today? Luo Qingtong felt a burst of joy in her heart as she thought about it. She went back and forth, thinking about all of her actions from the beginning to the end. Then she thought about Yi Qianxian's actions again. She found that although his actions were strange, he didn't find out that she was a woman. She immediately felt relieved. She turned around on the spot and then ran happily to Yi Qianxian's big bed and put down her quilt. "Brother, I'm coming up," she said to Yi Qianxian. The latter didn't pay attention to her at all. Swish! Yi Qianxian raised his hand and flicked his sleeve. The candlelight in the tent was extinguished by him at once. His attitude was very obvious. If she wanted to stay, she could stay. If she wanted to leave, she could leave. Out of sight, out of mind. Luo Qingtong felt even more relieved. She grinned as she pushed her blanket towards Yi Qianren's sleeping area. Then, she flipped over and laid down on top of her. If it weren't for the fear that Yi Qianxian would find out that there was nothing in her lower body if she got too close to Yi Qianxian, Luo Qingtong would have clung to Yi Qianxian's back to sleep. After Luo Qingtong's body lay down, Yi Qianxian's body shook violently. That was the feeling. In the darkness, Yi Qianxian's eyes were unusually bright. Previously, he disliked Luo Qingtong for being noisy and annoying, and he was worried about her whereabouts. He was very resistant to her existence in his heart. Therefore, he did not notice that every time the other party approached him, his body would always take in Luo Shaoqi's aura one step ahead of him. The first time she tore off his sleeve, it was like this. Every time she tried to get close to him, it was the same. Yi Qianxian deliberately suppressed the counterattack consciousness in his body. However, for powerhouses like them, if they weren't close to someone they were familiar with, they would be injured by his counterattack before they could even react. Even if he retracted his hand in time, the counterattack aura would still be reflected back to him temporarily. But every time Luo Shaoqi got close to him, whether it was intentional or not, he could control the counterattack consciousness in his body very well. Not a single time, he reacted before he could react. This was incredible. Even when he first met Luo Qingtong, the girl was almost hurt by him. But she was cunning and changeable, she easily avoided it. But at this moment, his body instinctively didn't take the initiative to attack Luo Shaoqi. It turned out that his body had already recognized Luo Qingtong before him, but he did not notice it at all. He thought Luo Shaoqi teat. This person had been hiding it from him for a long time. Yi Qianxian gritted his teeth. In the darkness, his eyes were shining like obsidian in the dark. However, the light inside was burning hot to the extreme. At this moment, his back was completely exposed in front of Luo Qingtong. There was no protection at all, but his body instinctively didn't raise any awareness of defense. Chapter 2569. Luo Qingtong had no idea what Yi Qianxian was thinking. She felt Yi Qianxian's body shake violently. She thought that the man was not used to sharing a bed with her. She immediately felt more at ease. She had thought too much before. Luo Qingtong did not expect to be able to sleep on the same bed with him so soon. She was very happy. She smiled and stared at Yi Qianxian's back, then closed her eyes happily. She was already very happy to be able to sleep on the same bed with him. As for other little tricks, they could wait until later. Otherwise, if they were caught and thrown out, the gains would not make up for the losses. Besides, now that she could sleep on the same bed with him, wouldn't it be easy to do anything in the future? With this thought, Luo Qingtong fell asleep happily. After she fell asleep, Yi Qianxian turned around. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he stared deeply at Luo Qingtong's body. The youth's figure was petite. Lying on the spacious bed, she occupied less than 1/3 of the space. Because she was sleeping close to his back, when Yi Qianxian turned over, she seemed to be nestled in his arms. She was neither too big nor too small, neither too long nor too short. She just happened to curl up in Yi Qianxian's arms, and the man directly hugged her. Humph, Yi Qianxian snorted softly, then his eyes wandered to her face. There, a large birthmark almost covered half of Luo Qingtong's face. Under the moonlight, it looked unusually ferocious and terrifying. This birthmark completely covered Luo Qingtong's face. When others saw Luo Qingtong's face, their attention would be attracted by this birthmark, and they would not be able to notice her true appearance. Yi Qianxian was the same. He hadn't noticed what Luo Qingtong looked like before, and he had no intention of finding out what she really looked like under her birthmark. If that wasn't the case, how could he have been fooled by her for so long? That's right, it was a lie. Yi Qianxian was almost certain that Luo Qingtong was Luo Shaoqi. This woman had deceived him for so long. Yi Qianxian gritted his teeth and took out a box of white powder from his storage ring. That's right, it was the kind of makeup used by young girls. This was also the reason why Feng Yu was so surprised earlier. Because her master never touched these things. This powder was obtained from Chu Ku by Feng Yu. There was no other way. Men like them didn't need to put on makeup. They could only think of a solution on Chu Ku and the others. Fortunately, Chu Ku and the others carried these things with them, so Feng Yu could easily get them. At this moment, Yi Qianxian was using this powder to cover up the traces of the birthmark on Luo Qingtong's face bit by bit. The impression of erasing the birthmark on the young man's face in his mind was too vague and vague. Now, he wanted to see it clearly. Under his hands, the birthmark on Luo Qingtong's face was erased and covered up bit by bit. Soon, the young girl's beautiful and otherworldly face was revealed in front of Yi Qianxian. What a cunning woman. The moment he saw Luo Qingtong's face was revealed, Yi Qianxian could no longer restrain his surging and burning emotions in his heart. He leaned over and kissed her. Clang. Chapter 2570. Luo Qingtong was awakened by a hot and repressed kiss on her lips. She vaguely saw the face of the man in front of her in her half-asleep state. She raised her hand to wrap it around his neck and responded passionately. Oh, Yi Qianxian, she moaned the man's name between her lips and teeth. Finally, she swallowed it all into Yi Qianxian's mouth. Luo Qingtong's moans were different from other people's. Yi Qianxian had heard countless people's moans. In the past, there was no lack of deceitful people who wanted to climb into his bed by his side. No matter if it was a man or a woman, those people's voices had always been pretentious and disgusting. However, Luo Qingtong's voice was unusually sweet. This kind of sweetness was filled with love, dominance, and a valiant response that was determined to win. She had never been a delicate flower that begged for his love. Instead, she was a flourishing demonic flower that wanted to be on par with him and walk side by side with him. Why did this woman make people love and hate her so much? At this moment, Yi Qianxian really wanted to swallow her into his stomach. Luo Qingtong was half awake and didn't know whether this was a dream or reality. However, when she thought about her identity as a man and Yi Qianxian's indifferent attitude towards her before, Luo Qingtong felt that this was most likely a dream. She really missed that man too much. It wasn't easy to sleep on the same bed with him, but she actually had such a hot and lingering dream. However, this dream was really good. After all, if she couldn't kiss him in reality, she could kiss him in a dream. Moreover, this dream was so real. With this thought in mind, Luo Qingtong suddenly turned over and rode on Yi Qianxian's body. She mumbled and kissed Yi Qianxian in a daze. Qianxian, I missed you so much. Her tone was domineering, arrogant, and a little indescribable grievance. Yi Qianxian was originally very angry at her for hiding it from him. The moment she flipped over and pressed him down, he was prepared to flip over and press her back down. But for some reason, when he heard her aggrieved words, the anger in his heart instantly surged like a flood breaking through a dam, flooding thousands of miles away. He coldly snorted and raised his hand to support Luo Qingtong's buttocks. He lifted her up and made her sit more comfortably on his body. Then, he sneered and said, "Humph, I don't think you have anything to miss. If she missed him, why would she keep denying her identity? Even after discovering his identity, she refused to tell him who she was. As Yi Qianxian thought about this, the anger in his heart began to burn. He raised his head abruptly and bit the tip of Luo Qingtong's perky nose. Hiss, were you born in the year of the dog? Luo Qingtong's face was full of grievance. She was caught off guard. She was lying on Yi Qianxian's body and nibbling on him when he suddenly bit her nose. She instantly hissed in pain and raised her hand to cover her nose. She looked at him with teary eyes. This man was actually so cruel to her in her dream. He bit her so hard. Did he want to bite her to death? Luo Qingtong glared at Yi Qianxian. The latter snorted and ignored her completely. His bite didn't even leave a mark. How could he not know how much strength he used? Moreover, so what if he bit her? She had lied to him for so long. Shouldn't he bite her? Chapter 2571. Why did you lie to me? Yi Qianxian's voice was cold. When Luo Qingtong heard his words, she almost fell off his body. It was Yi Qianren who helped her up and made her sit back down on her own body. Ahem, that. I didn't do it on purpose. Luo Qingtong looked at the man whose face was as black as the bottom of a pot. She finally understood why he had bitten her. *CK, I actually had a dream. I even dreamed that he was going to settle accounts with me. How worried was she that this man would find out that she had concealed her identity? Luo Qingtong coughed lightly and quickly explained, both of us have provoked enemies. Obviously, yours is more powerful. I did it for your own good. That's why I deliberately concealed my identity. Is that so? Yi Qianxian snorted with a noncommittal expression. When did you find out my identity? How long had this woman concealed it from him? Ahem, that day by the river? Luo Qingtong said with a guilty expression. She inexplicably remembered that day when she had proudly told Yi Qianxian that her mouth was bigger than his. Oh my God. This man must have forgotten, right? Obviously, Yi Qianxian hadn't forgotten. He still remembered it very clearly. Oh, your mouth is bigger than mine? Yi Qianxian was so angry that he laughed. That day was when he had completely given up on Luo Qingtong's identity. Even though there were so many similarities and palpitations, Yi Qianxian could only let it go because he had confirmed the man's identity without a doubt. In the end, this woman had recognized him at that time. She had even lied to him. Her mouth was bigger than his. What did she take out? Did she have it? This woman really dared to say anything. As soon as Yi Qianxian said that, Luo Qingtong immediately pounced on him and nibbled on his lips. Okay, I was wrong. At that time, I didn't know who you were. Later on, Fengyu said that he was looking for his wife, so he was anxious and mistook her for someone else. Luo Qingtong finally realized that this was her man's. It really wasn't her fault. After all, this was Yi Qianxian. How could she say something like that? Wasn't she just making things difficult for this man? However, Yi Qianxian's expression darkened when he heard her words. Very good. He squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth. While greedily savoring the girl's fragrant breath on his lips, he gritted his teeth and said, You don't know my identity, yet you dare to say such words to another man. Did this woman even know what it meant to be reserved? Damn! Luo Qingtong's lips twitched at Yi Qianxian's unusual attention. Wasn't there something wrong with his focus? However, Yi Qianxian didn't care too much about her hiding her identity. Luo Qingtong naturally persevered and hurriedly said, Yes, I was wrong. I won't dare to do it again. Qianren, don't be angry. Luo Qingtong said as she gently pecked the man's lips. Her lips and tongue were small and delicate, easily prying open Yi Qianxian's lips and driving straight in. Yi Qianxian was originally still angry, but after her kiss, his breathing became chaotic again. This woman. He gritted his teeth. He wanted to teach her a lesson, but he couldn't resist her lingering and affectionate feelings at this moment. The girl's lips and teeth were soft and her breath was fragrant. Almost every moment was testing his self-control. Chapter 2572. Haha. Luo Qingtong's laughter was like a silver bell. She raised her hand and wrapped it around Yi Qianming's neck, passionately responding to his kiss. It felt so good to have this person by her side. It felt so good to be loved wholeheartedly by this person. Luo Qingtong didn't have to think about any schemes or escape routes when she was by his side. Because this man would always tolerate her and love her. How could he be so good to her? It's a pity that this is a dream. Luo Qingtong was depressed and couldn't help but mutter. She could only get close to her man in her dream. She was really too aggrieved. Depressed. Just when Luo Qingtong was feeling depressed, Yi Qianming was so angry that he laughed. This woman, what did she mean by, "It's a pity that this is a dream"? Did she think that this was a dream? No wonder she was so obedient. It made him feel that it was too unrealistic. Yi Qianming gritted his teeth and bit Luo Qingtong's lips fiercely, gently rubbing them. This woman, he really couldn't hit or scold her. It was really a predestined calamity. He fell asleep with Luo Qingtong in his arms in frustration. The next morning, Luo Qingtong woke up in a daze. Just as she was about to greet Yi Qianming, she was startled awake. Bro. Brother? Luo Qingtong stared at her sprawled body that was hugging Yi Qianming. She was about to go crazy. What kind of posture was this? Last night, you're finally awake? Yi Qianming's voice was cold. The moment Luo Qingtong spoke, he had already opened his eyes. I also want to ask you, how long are you going to hug me? Yi Qianming snorted coldly. His eyes swept across Luo Qingtong's expression and suddenly felt that it was good for him to pretend that he didn't know anything. Let this woman pretend to be a man to deceive him. Did she think that last night was a dream? Then she would do it properly. When Yi Qianming spoke, Luo Qingtong also remembered what happened last night. She caressed her lips and felt waves of pain coming from them. Luo Qingtong froze on the spot as if she had been struck by lightning when she thought of how she had wrapped herself around Yi Qianming like an octopus. Oh my God, are you serious? Not only did she have a dream last night, but she also touched Yi Qianming in reality? Did she reveal her identity or not? Luo Qingtong carefully recalled what happened last night. But she was too happy last night. After falling asleep, she had several dreams in a row. She didn't know which dream actually happened in reality. None of them. The marks on her lips, did she bite herself or was it Yi Qianming who molested her? Luo Qingtong looked so conflicted that she even forgot to let go of Yi Qianming. Yi Qianming looked at her complicated expression and felt very happy in his heart. Let this woman know how it felt to be deceived by her in the past. Let's see if she still dares to do it in the future. Let go. Yi Qianming's voice was cold. It seemed that his movements were big, but in fact, he didn't use any strength to shake off Luo Qingtong's limbs and got up. Luo Qingtong came back to her senses from his actions, and she looked even more guilty. She peeked at the man's expression and felt so conflicted. Oh my God, what did she do to Yi Qianming last night? Chapter 2573. Her heart felt like it was being scratched by a cat, but she didn't dare to ask. Yi Qianming was wearing a mask, so she couldn't see if there was a mark on his lips. But when Yi Qianxian was washing up, his clothes were suddenly opened, so Luo Qingtong saw a red mark on his collarbone. Oh my God. Luo Qingtong's eyes widened and she jumped up. She didn't dare to look at Yi Qianxian's collarbone. Kiss mark. That's a kiss mark. Oh my God. Luo Qingtong felt that she needed to calm down. Kiss mark, she actually left a kiss mark on Yi Qianxian's body. Luo Qingtong didn't know how to answer Yi Qianxian when he found the kiss mark. Could it be that she accidentally took a bite because she dreamed of a drumstick last night? This excuse was too frustrating. Luo Qingtong thought about it and couldn't think of a good excuse or reason. No, she had to go out and hide first. She would think about it later. As Luo Qingtong thought of this, she immediately rushed out. Brother, I have something to do first," she said and left the tent with a swish. On the other hand, Yi Qianren leisurely looked at her departing figure. She snorted softly and raised her hand to cover up her accidentally exposed collarbone. This woman, let her worry and suffer for a while. Outside the tent, Bei Qing and Feng Yu came to look for Yi Qianxian. Just as he walked to the door, he saw Luo Qingtong's figure rushing out in a hurry. She looked as if her butt was on fire. The two were about to greet her when they saw her red and swollen lips and the mark on them. In an instant, the two were struck by lightning. Oh my God! Bei Qing's body trembled. He looked at Luo Qingtong's disappearing figure and his mind was filled with thoughts. Feng Yu, his voice trembled, and his eyes stared blankly, his gaze drifting. Did you see that? Luo Xiaoqi, she. Bei Qing was about to cry. Oh my God! Master is really gay. How could he do that to Luo Xiaoqi? Master, wake up. You can find the evil doctor and ask her to dress up as a man every day. Master. Bei Qing was going crazy. Feng Yu, on the other hand, was a lot clearer after a moment of shock. He had suspected that his master had a crush on Luo Xiaoqi. But the plot developed too quickly. With his master's temperament, even if he treated Luo Xiaoqi differently for the time being, it was impossible for things to develop to such an extent in such a short time. There must be something wrong with this. Let's go and ask master. Feng Yu said and pulled Bei Qing into Yi Qianxian's tent. Outside the camp, Luo Qingtong ran out and found that she had accidentally run far away. Now she was a long distance away from the camp. But she didn't care very much. Because she had told Chu Xiaofeng and the others not to leave the camp these 2 days and let the wounded rest for 2 days. And Chu Xiaofeng and the others also needed to sort out what they had gained during this period, so they all agreed. Luo Qingtong was not worried that she couldn't find him after running far away. She was depressed because she didn't know how to face Yi Qianxian when she went back. Damn it, it was killing her. She only hoped that man didn't find that there was something wrong with her collarbone. Chapter 2574. Luo Qingtong covered her face. She no longer had any hope for her moral integrity that had fallen to the ground. She seriously recalled the dreams she had last night to see if there was anything that could be remedied. At this moment, in her mind, an extremely sharp and mournful cry suddenly resounded. Feeling the sharp cry in her mind, Luo Qingtong's eyes were stunned at first, then suddenly became extremely sharp. This is Snowball's voice. For a long time, the connection between Luo Qingtong and Snowball had been cut off. In the past, Luo Qingtong thought that it was because Snowball had disappeared with Chu Lingfeng and was too far away from her, so she didn't pay much attention to it. But ever since she saw Chu Lingfeng and Snowball in the sky above the abandoned continent, Luo Qingtong knew that someone had blocked the connection between her and Snowball. At this moment, Snowball's cry was sharp and mournful, as if it was weeping blood. In an instant, Luo Qingtong thought that something might have happened to it and Chu Lingfeng. Swish! Luo Qingtong's figure instantly rushed in the direction of Snowball's cry of blood. She didn't know what Snowball had done, but it broke through the barrier of their connection and directly screamed in her mind. At the same time, Luo Qingtong could also sense Snowball's position. Her figure swept through the air, and almost instantly, she opened her pair of bloody eyes. Swish! While Luo Qingtong was rushing over, somewhere in the abandoned continent, Chu Lingfeng and Snowball were surrounded by a group of people, both covered in blood. "Huh, Chu Lingfeng, you fool. How could you be so gullible? I just casually told you that there are spiritual herbs here that can heal broken limbs and regenerate arteries and veins, and you actually rushed here. Huh, what an idiot." Chu Yuqing looked at Chu Lingfeng and Snowball in the middle of the forest, his face filled with indescribable pride. Chu Lingfeng, this idiot, was indeed brainless. He believed whatever she said. How could a spirit herb that could regenerate a severed limb and completely recover without any loss of strength be found in a 6-star region? Not to mention in this abandoned continent. This Chu Lingfeng is really as stupid as a pig. However, this was also good. If he wasn't so stupid, he wouldn't have been able to set up an ambush and capture him. This trip to the abandoned continent was their only chance to kill Chu Lingfeng. He was highly valued by the patriarch and the elders of the clan. No matter who it was, they couldn't do anything to him. However, things were different in this abandoned continent. There were many dangers here, and life and death were up to fate. If they killed Chu Lingfeng, then arranged for him to be killed by a horde of magical beasts, who would know that they were the ones who did it? Chu Yuqing was very proud of himself. He looked at Chu Lingfeng as if he were looking at a dead man. At this time, Chu Lingfeng was desperately rushing in a certain direction, completely ignoring the attacks of Chu Yuqing and the others. When he heard Chu Yuqing's words, he suddenly stopped. Then, he looked at Chu Yuqing with a fierce expression and said, "What did you say?" You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.